Blackbirds in the Realm of Darkness, with special guest Jim Goodall and guest co-host Jared Murphy. Episode 8, Season 2 of the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast. Welcome to the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast. Coming to you from the glacial dumping grounds known as the Michigan Basin. I'm Michelle.
And I am Wayne.
And we are a Michigan-based husband and wife educator and podcasting duo that after having a UFO sighting in March of 2018, have started to examine UFOs and other paranormal topics within Michigan and beyond.
Topics include UFOs, the paranormal, conspiracy theories, ghosts, alternative history and archaeology, cryptids, and all things strange and paranormal. So sit back, grab a drink, and come along with us on this journey down the paranormal rabbit hole. Hey everybody, welcome back.
Hello everyone.
Oh, welcome to the only podcast in the world where when you go down the rabbit hole, you're taking an escalator.
Yeah, that pretty much explains how things are starting out this summer.
Yes.
It's too bad that I missed this interview. I would have enjoyed talking to Jim and to Jared.
Yes, what a fantastic interview. And before we jump into the news and everything, this is episode 8 of season 2, and we're calling this one Blackbirds in the Realm of Darkness, with special guest Jim Goodall. And since I could not find my wife anywhere to help co-host with me.
That's because I was at Fort Field with the DCI professional marching bands.
Well, we were able to get a good friend of the podcast, Mr. Jared Murphy, the author of It's Not Aliens Worse, It's Us, and of the Not Aliens YouTube channel, to come on and help with some co-hosting. So that was great to have him on. I was going to say,
for a co-host, I approve of Jared.
Yes, very much so. So that was great to have him on.
Wife's approval.
The wife's approval. Happy wife, happy life. Remember that, guys.
There we go. There's the signature tagline.
Well, at least I have you back for this portion of the podcast, and when we wrap things up, we'll have a little conversation.
And our next 2 interviews, but
we'll talk about that
those
later.
Come up later on.
Yeah, these are going to be some great shows coming up. But just so everybody knows, don't forget we're now on YouTube. That's right. You can search us out by typing in Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast in the search field on YouTube, and you should be able to find us.
And don't forget, if you have a story you would like to tell, we would like to talk to you. You can reach out to us at mi.ufo.podcast@gmail.com. Send us a brief summary of your experience, and we'll contact you to discuss things further and try to get you or your story on the podcast.
Also, if you would like to support the podcast, because that's how we can keep this thing going, and you would like to rock out some of the latest swag, head on over to our online store. That's miufopodcaststore.online.
And if you like the show, don't forget to check out our Patreon page if you would like to support the podcast and keep us going. It is patreon.com/MIUFOSPEP, where you can sign up. We can't wait to give you a shout out for all of your support on future episodes.
All of those things that we just talked about can be found in the show notes. So feel free to click on any of those links and it'll take you to any of those pages. But now, Michelle, I think it's that time.
It's time for What's in the News.
Yes. What is in the news?
Coming out of Fox News, San Diego flashing lights mystery finally has an explanation. The puzzling phenomenon was reportedly seen in San Diego and Tijuana. The mysterious lights floating over San Diego finally have an explanation. On Monday evening, so this week, strange patterns of moving lights were seen floating above the city. Images and videos of the phenomena quickly garnered attention on social media. And when they say garnered attention, they are not joking. These home videos with just like the spastic crazy sounds of people recording them.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's over the top.
It really is. You want to talk about over dramatic much, and wait till we get to the end. I can't
so
the
the levitating lights, described as orange in hue and in a definitive pattern, baffled observers who were left unconvinced that they were of natural origins. Some others even suspected unidentified flying objects or UFOs or alien origins, but the U.S. Coast Guard said they were actually from flares fired from a ship off the coast. The puzzling pixels were reportedly from naval crews conducting flare training with expired flares, the Coast Guard said per their television and KGTV.
You know what? That's absolutely right. One of the things you can tell these lights are flares is by the way they flicker. They were flickering as if they were burning, number one. And number two, they last for about 5 minutes.
Yeah, and
go out almost to the second. They're designed that way.
And then they were also reportedly seen in nearby Tijuana. I like this. A witness told KGTV that she saw planes in the sky and boats in the water. She said the strange lights were brighter than the lights on the planes and those on the boat. I like the kid on Twitter. There are some wild lights floating over downtown San Diego. Does anyone know if it's 4th of July related or the Navy? Or do I get to believe it's finally aliens visiting us?
Oh my God. This is crazy.
Oh my God.
You know, now because of the UFO mainstreaming that's happened, now everything in the sky is going to be on the news and it's going to be UFOs.
I'll tell you though, definitely check out this link because some of the videos, I mean, they're cool to see.
Yes, they are. They are cool.
But it's flares.
Yeah, you can definitely tell.
So not landing lights, not a triangle, they're flares.
No, but depending on the angle you were to look at those things, they would look like a triangular craft.
Well, and if you've never seen any of these before and you see them for the first time.
Yeah,
these
are military flares. They shoot them up into the sky and then they ignite and then float down on parachutes, and they float down very, very slowly. But the fuse in them only burns for about 5 minutes.
Well, it sounds like, San Diego and Tijuana got an early 4th of July show.
Yep.
All right, moving on to other items in the news coming out of USA Today. NASA baffled by mystery rocket body that crashed into the moon.
Okay, and I need to give a special shout out because I learned of this news article from Richie over at GoofOn. Yes, so Richie over at GoofOn was talking about this, and I thought this would be perfect since that one article was so short. Let's talk about this one.
Well, yeah, anything that crashes into the moon, we've got to look into. So a mystery rocket body that crashed into the moon is baffling NASA. According to NASA, astronomers discovered a rocket body heading toward a lunar collision late last year. Impact occurred on March 4th, and NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter spotted the crash site on the moon's surface shortly after. New images shared on June 24th by NASA show a snapshot of the site. The crash landing left behind a double crater more than 90 feet wide, the Space Administration reported in a news release. According to the Space Administration, two large masses on each end of the rocket may have caused the craters, but it noted that the impact marks are highly unusual. Typically, a spent rocket mass is concentrated at the motor end. The rest of the rocket stage mainly consists of an empty fuel tank, NASA said in the news release. Since the origin of the rocket body remains uncertain, the double nature of the crater may indicate its identity, NASA wrote. So no space exploring nations have claimed responsibility for the projectile, which leaves scientists baffled about who was behind its launch, the Houston Chronicle reported. So, I mean, if you take a look,
it's really bizarre
at these photos and the crater that it created, that is crazy.
And it looks like there's two craters, but I think one of the craters was already there, and then it looks like the rocket body, I mean, the best we can make out, the rocket body's still sitting in the one on the right-hand side, and that looks like the fresher crater. However, how fast was this thing going to create a crater like that?
And it's the whodunit.
Yeah, whose rocket body is that got out of Earth's orbit? And
that's the whole thing. It's the whodunit. It's like, who's going to take credit for this one?
Well, what was it, last year that the Chinese had a rover on the moon? So it might be from the Chinese. So,
well, you just never know, and we'll, keep our ears peeled on that one to see if anybody claims its origin.
Yeah, we shall see. All right. Well, I think we should basically get into...
You've got a long interview with your guys' night out since wifey here was...
Yeah, we cover all kinds of things, from the history of the SR-71 Blackbird to strange synchronicities and...
to the TR-3B.
All kinds
UFOs,
of dreaming and all that. So
you guys talked about a lot.
We did. It's a very long interview. I think it clocks in at about 2 hours and 25 minutes. So,
well, for those who don't know who Jim Goodall is, let's go into a little bit of a background to let our listening audience know. James C. Goodall is a published author with 24 books in print, and with book number 25, A Pictorial History of the Seawolf Virginia-class nuclear submarines, in the final stages of going to press. He is a recognized expert on low-observable aircraft such as the F-117, B-2A, the Lockheed Twins, the F-22 and the F-35, and the Lockheed Skunk Works family of Blackbirds. Photographing and writing about spooky aircraft for the last 35 years, he is also an acknowledged expert on Area 51 as it pertains to flight testing classified aircraft in a remote location. His very first book, co-authored with Bill Sweetman, was the first volume in print on the F-117, and it sold more than 60,000 copies. James's 7 previous books with SquadronSignal have sold a minimum of 3,500 copies to a maximum of 17,000 copies. Even the $100 US Blackbird Flight Manual that was published by Motorbooks in 1990 sold 1,500 copies in 15 months. His Blackbird pictorial from Schiffer, published in May of 2018, is considered by many in the spooky aircraft world to be the most complete pictorial ever assembled on the subject.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, with my special co-host for the evening, Jared Murphy, let's go ahead and welcome Mr. Jim Goodall. My guest for tonight is a very, very well-known, I guess you would say, troublemaker for the Air Force in Area 51, but we can dig into that a little bit. But this person is an incredible author with over 100 books to his name, more coming out, I'm sure, which we'll talk about. But we've got Mr. Jim Goodall joining us tonight. Jim, thank you for joining us.
I'm delighted to be here, and we're off and running.
We're off and running.
Yeah.
And then, as a special co-host tonight, since Michelle could not join for the conversation, I hit up our good friend, Mr. Jared Murphy from Not Aliens and the author of It's Not Aliens, Worse, It's Us. Jared, thanks for joining us.
That's great. I mean, I'm looking forward to being on with you guys. And of course, as I'm so close to releasing the second version of my book, I'm now retrospectively thinking, if he got 100 books out, what is my problem taking 7 months to get my rewrite out?
Well, no, actually, I only have 29 books. I mean, I appreciate the.
I thought you were over 100 now.
No, I've had over 4,000 of my photos are published. I have been in over 100. I have contributed to over 100 different books by various authors. My 28th book was my 75 years of the Lockheed Skunk Works, which is 384 pages. It weighs 5.5 pounds. And it's been out just not quite a year, and it's in its third printing. So that just thrills the hell out of me.
Yeah, I know Amazon said they were going to charge me an extra fee because of how heavy your book is. So
yeah, 5.5 pounds.
I'm waiting for the loan to go through so I can pay that fee. But can you give our audience who may not be familiar with you a little bit of background on who Jim Goodall is?
Well, who am I? I am a guy who absolutely loves airplanes. The spookier, the better. I love things that go bump in the night. It's always been my job to challenge our government because it's for and by the people. I know when I did my very, very first book was on the F-117, and my wing commander there at the Minnesota Air Guard, he was flying from Northwest. He called me into his office one day, and I was the wing historian and retired as a master sergeant. He said, Jim, I fly with a guy who's one of the first guys to fly the F-117. You want to interview him? And this is before anybody had seen the F-117. And I said, sure. So his name was Steve Paulson. His call sign was Hollywood. And I called him up, told him who I was. He said, oh yeah, Pat told me all about you. And lived in Wayzata, and Jared knows where that's at. It's a beautiful part of the western suburbs.
It's pretty stunning.
Yeah. So I went in there. Bill Sweetman and I put together 400 questions in 5 different categories. And Bill at the time was a published author, and I hadn't published anything at the time. Contributed to a lot, but didn't publish anything. So I sat down with Steve on 3 different occasions. And out of the 400 questions, we actually got it up to about 520. There were only 3 questions he wouldn't answer. And I was able to figure it out. And that was the substance of my very first book. And I co-authored with Bill Sweetman. And that was sort of the catalyst. But my area of expertise is the Blackbird. I joined the Air Force on March 27th, 1962. I was a juvenile delinquent, and it was either shape up and fly right or go to jail till I was 18 or go in the service. So I went in the service because I knew I wasn't going to shape up and fly right. So I aced all the tests so I could go anything I wanted to go into. And I actually ended it up in a career field that I didn't start with, but I got into becoming a historian. And that's what I really love. But I was assigned to Edwards Air Force Base on temporary duty to support 3 programs for Category 1 testing. And that was the YC-141 Starlifter from Lockheed, the North American Aviation XB-70 Valkyrie, and at the time, a classified program, which turned out to be the Lockheed Skunk Works Blackbird, the YF-12 Interceptor. And I saw my first Blackbird on March 10th, 1964, and I've never been the same since. And because of that, I started digging into the Blackbird program, and the official policy was not to cooperate. I sent letters to Air Force, to Lockheed, to Department of Defense, to everybody I can think of, my senators and my congressmen. Got nowhere. So I started digging. The more I dug, the more I found out. The more I found out, the deeper I dug. And over the course of the last 60 years, I became the world's foremost authority on the history and development of the Lockheed family of Blackbirds. And even Sherm Mullen and Jack Gordon Jeff Babion and Rob Weiss. All four of those gentlemen were the heads of the Skunk Works. They all said that my Blackbird book and my 75 Years of the Skunk Work books are their absolute favorite books anywhere. So that's sort of my background. I had 5 years active duty in the Air Force. I had a 10-year break. I had 21 years as a traditional weekender with the Minnesota Air Guard. I'm very proud of that. And I scrounged a Blackbird. I had a friendship with Ben Rich, who at the time was the president of the Skunk Works. He replaced Kelly Johnson. And we talked once a quarter for 25 years. And I don't know how I got on his call sheet, but he'd either call me or I'd call him. And in August of '89, he calls me at home. He said, Jim, I says, I got some information for you. I said, what's that? He said, I got it from the horse's mouth. The Blackbirds aren't going to make it through Congress. And if anybody can scrounge one, it's you. So I started the ball rolling. I called the Adjutant General of the State of New York, called the secretary, and I said, General Weaver's office. I said, yes, ma'am, this is Sergeant Goodall with the 133rd. Is General Weaver available? I said, just a minute, I'll put you through. So General Weaver gets in the side and he said, Sergeant, how can I help you? I said, sir, how would the New York Air Guard like to move the world's fastest airplane in a couple of your C-5s? And he said, you mean the Blackbird? I said, yes, sir. And he said, when you're ready, you call, we'll haul. About the same time, Pratt & Whitney was trying to get a Blackbird and put it on a wind vane at West Palm Beach, where their engine test facility is. And Arnie Gunderson, who was Mr. J-58 on the Blackbird program from beginning to end, he asked the Air Force, would you lease us a C-5? Now, can we lease a C-5 from you? He said, the Air Force said, yes. It's $967,000 a day plus gas. And I scrounged 2 C-5s for 8 days each. And it cost us absolutely nothing. So I'm also one of the best scroungers in the Air Force. So I went to my boss, who was a 2-star, General Schwab, and I said, General Schwab, I want to get a Blackbird for the Minnesota Air Guard Museum. He starts laughing at me. I said, General, don't just laugh at me and say no. Give me the opportunity to fail. And that's when he asked me, well, how are you going to get it here? And I told him, I got 2 C-5s lined up. All we have to do is make a phone call. And from there, I got the entire Minnesota congressional delegation to sign off on our letter to the Air Force Museum, because the contributions from Rosemont, from Honeywell, and from 3M and Sheldall, those are all programs that supported the Blackbird program. And 5 of the first 9 pilots to fly the Blackbird learned how to fly in the Air Guard. Bob Gilliland with the Tennessee Air Guard, Jim Eastham with the Georgia Air Guard, and same with Lou Schock. So we got one. Desert Storm slowed it down a year, but on the 30th of October, 1991, just before we had 61 inches of snow, that was that 1991 blizzard right around Halloween, where 3 storms came through and over 10 days dumped 61 inches. And then we thought we were going to be in for a terrible winter. Then again, it didn't snow again until March. So, but my background is a love and an obsession with airplanes, and the spookier, the better.
Now, did that start before the military when you were like a kid, or was this something after you joined the Air Force that you got passionate about?
No, the way really the catalyst that really brought everything to a head, at the time I'm 6 years old. We're living in San Jose, not that far from San Jose Municipal Airport. It was still light out and I'd already gone to bed. And my dad came into the bedroom and he said, I don't know what's coming, but you got to get up and see it. So he went outside and there was it felt like the ground was vibrating. It was, and over the Coast Mountains came not 1, not 2, but 24 Convair B-36s. It's a 10 engine, 260-foot wingspan. It can fly for 60 hours unrefueled, nonstop, anywhere in the world, pretty much. And it was our global deterrent at the time. And that right there got me into the bug of airplanes and machines. And it's almost like the Steve Martin, John Candy movie, Plane, Trains, and Automobiles. And I love them all. I have a fast car. It'll do 185 miles an hour off the showroom floor. And, but it's a Chevy. I can get it fixed almost anywhere. I have myself a Grand Sport Corvette.
Nice.
I love machines, and there's the ultimate machine that I've ever had the honor and the privilege of climbing all over and touching almost every square inch of it is the Blackbird.
For people that are not aware of like the specifications and the mission of the Blackbird, can you give us a little bit of a rundown on that? I'm familiar with it because I'm a former military guy. And by the time I was like 2 years old, I was in an airplane. My dad was a pilot. He, retired from United. He was a crew chief in Vietnam on Hueys and was shot down and went back 3 times. He couldn't get enough of it, I guess. But, so I've always been around aircraft and things like that. And I've also been very much fascinated with Skunk Works and the SR-71. But for those people out there that just are not familiar with it, can you explain a little bit about it?
In 1958, the CIA and the Air Force realized that their premier spy plane, which is the U-2 spy plane, Gary Powers was shot down on May 1st, 1960, and he was destined to be shot down. That was all part of the plan. But they needed a replacement for the U-2. The U-2 is a subsonic, it's a jet-powered glider. They had one flame out over central Russia, and it was able to glide over 1,000 miles. It got out of harm's way that way. So my passion for all things Blackbird really started on March 13th, 1964, and it was conceived by the CIA working with Lockheed, and also they were working with General Dynamics on Kingfish. Both of them were Mach 3 to Mach 4, which is 3 times or 4 times the speed of sound. So you're looking at anywhere from 2,000 miles an hour to about 2,400 miles an hour, flying between 90 and 120,000 feet, unrefueled range at least 3,000 nautical miles. And this was 11 years after Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier in a rocket-powered airplane, the Bell X-1. And Lockheed was tasked to design an airplane, as did Victor Dosen there at General Dynamics Fort Worth. It was Convair back then. And the contract was awarded in September 1959 to build initially 15 CIA A-12s. And the A-12 stands for article, doesn't stand for attack. And this thing was an airplane that was a single place, just the pilot. There's a camera behind the pilot, which weighed about 830 pounds. The airplane is 103 feet long. It weighs maximum gross weight about 130,000 pounds. It is a wingspan of 58 feet, and it can move through the air at 2 miles every 3 seconds, or 43 miles a minute. And on its retirement flight in March 1990, SR-71, which is a derivative of the original CIA A-12, on its retirement flight flew from LA to Washington, D.C. in 1 hour and 4 minutes. And everybody said, wow, that's incredible. And I said, not as incredible as it could have been, because Ben Rich told me that when they hooked up with the tanker off the coast of LA to start the speed run, the fuel gauges malfunctioned, which was not unusual. So they didn't know if they had a full load of fuel. So they took it easy from LA to Cincinnati. No, from LA to St. Louis. And in St. Louis, the gas gauges, all of a sudden they came up, they realized they had adequate fuel. So they firewalled everything. And they went from St. Louis to Cincinnati in 8 minutes. And Ben Rich told me that if they would have been able to firewall it for the entire run, they would have gone on its retirement flight from LA to Washington, D.C. in 45 to 46 minutes on its retirement flight. And this is 1991. Correction, 1990. So, and it was really ironic. I gave a talk on the history of the Blackbirds at Beale here last April this year. My thought was, why would they want me to come and talk about the Blackbird? That was its home for 25 years. Then I realized it hasn't flown in 30, actually 32 years. So the A-12 and the SR-71 Blackbird were designed for one purpose, and that was for aerial reconnaissance over denied airspace. And at between 85 and 90,000 feet, and that's where they flew, and they flew at Mach 3.2. They can get up to Mach 3.3, but that requires written permission from the wing commander. The airplane was designed to outrun surface-to-air missiles. And on the 27th, 28th, and 29th of October, 1967, Denny Sullivan flew over Hanoi Haiphong on their first mission over North Vietnam. They were flying out of Kadena, Okinawa. And the air refueled over Thailand, came back 43 minutes later, and Pat made another pass over it. Hanoi Haiphong. Well, it really irritated the North Vietnamese and the Russian advisors and the Chinese advisors. So he said, we'll be waiting for him next time he comes through. So the following day, it wasn't Denny Sullivan that was flying. I think it was Frank Murray. And he went the exact same time, exact same route, same return time, 43 minutes later. And this really pissed off the North Vietnamese. So they sent guys out in the field. They dug parabolic trenches and sat there with big things in their ears with a field telephone. And they knew where the track was because it was booming on all the way across. And they could see, if they looked up high enough, they could see the contrail. So they were ready for Denny when he came back on the 29th. And the Blackbird guys had been complaining to scheduling, the Strategic Reconnaissance Support Center. And they said, we cannot fly the same mission 2 or 3 days in a row because they're going to know what our track is and going to be ready for us. So on the 29th, Denny is coming back. He took off, flew over Hanoi. They knew that he was going to be coming back 43 minutes later, and they were ready for him. And they launched. Denny said it was about 50 SAMs were launched at him. And at 90,000 feet, there's like 0.4% of the atmosphere. Surface-to-air missile, the original SA-2 SAMs are boost glide. So you have to go from approximately sea level to 90,000 feet. And this thing is flying through the air at 43 miles a minute. So you only have about 5 seconds to realize it's up there, to try to lock on and fire everything you have. And the security people had, during briefing, said the SA-2s can't get above 70,000 feet. But there's a periscope on the Blackbirds. All of them have it, primarily to look for contrail. And Denny was looking at the periscope, and he's seeing surface-to-air missile things going above him and detonating. And when he landed at Kadena, he was really pissed because they threw a lot of stuff at him, and it was only pure luck that he wasn't shot down. And because there's almost no air up there, overpressure can't damage the airplane. You have to hit it. And that was the problem. If it had been down to 30, 35,000 feet, just the overpressure from the explosion would have damaged and possibly brought the airplane down. But it didn't. But once he got back to Kadena after his mission, they did a post-flight. They found some damage on the inboard leading edge of, I think it was the left wing. And they sent the composite panel to CIA. They did an analysis of what caused the damage. And they said it's a fusing mechanism off an SA-2 surface-to-air missile. So Denny Sullivan, and he just passed away. He retired as a brigadier general, is the highest flying pilot ever to sustain flak damage. And but it was designed to overfly restricted airspace. With the shoot down of Francis Gary Powers, that ensured it was going forward. And one of the reasons I said earlier that Powers getting shot down was part of the plan. There were a number of Congress critters. I can't call them congressmen or women because they don't qualify for that. But they said, we're spending $2 billion developing the Oxcart program, the A-12 program, the CIA-sponsored Blackbird program. And to have something that goes through the air as fast as it did, and the program name was Oxcart, it's kind of a chuckle. And they were concerned that money could be spent elsewhere. And the only way, you said, well, we have a reconnaissance platform that's overflying the Soviet Union at will. That was the U-2. They're flying on was it Peshawar, Pakistan. And they said, why do we need a replacement for something? They can fly over the Soviet Union any day of the week. Well, it turns out that the high altitude relight system was sabotaged there in Peshawar, and they had normally the pilot that was scheduled to fly that flight doesn't fly. The alternate backup airplane will come in with the backup pilot. But Powers insisted that, no, I've been briefed on what has to be shot, where I have to go and everything else. So I'll take it up. And he was over central Russia when he had a flameout, which wasn't unusual, but with the malfunctioning gaseous hydrogen restart system, he had to come down to about 35,000 feet to relight. And he just relit his engine, and he's on his way up. So he's going on about a 30 to 40 degree angle of attack going up. And a surface-to-air missile blew up right behind him and broke its elevators. And those are the control surfaces on the horizontal stabilizer, the tail. And he lost control of the airplane. One of the wings broke off. I'm not tail feathers, but one of his, his 80-foot long wingspan broke, half of it broke off. So he's pinwheeling down. He opens the canopy to jump out because they didn't have ejection seat back then that caused weight. They wanted that thing to be as light as possible. And he got thrown out of the airplane, but he's still attached to his oxygen hose and the communication line. He had to pull himself back into the U-2 to disconnect his hoses and lines, thrown clear. And I talked to his roommate. That's the only reason I know what happened, because his roommate was the guy who recovered him when they made the spy swap. And Powers, John said that Powers, when he landed in this field, some old Russian farmer was ready to run him through with his pitchfork because he thought he was an alien from outer space because he had his flight suit on and his helmet and everything else. And said that was the scariest part of the whole part of the mission. And he spent 15 months there. But one of the terms and conditions of Powers' release was a cessation of all manned overflights over the Soviet Union and its allies. And that's what created they called the Little Blackbird, the D-21 drone. And it was a Mach 3.6, 3.8, 100,000 foot. And it was designed to overfly the Soviet Union and China. It had 4 operational missions, none of them successful. And it's just, the whole thing was veiled in secrecy. And it's one of the coolest things ever that I've ever been involved in. And I'm even to this day, I'm not sure how all the stars aligned and everything else that brought me to this point. But I love the airplane. I love the Skunk Works. I'm real familiar with Area 51. I've been at the fence line at Tonopah Test Range and at Area 51 over 80 different occasions over the last 40 years. I just lost a very dear friend of mine, John Lear. He just passed away in this last March 30th. I thought he wasn't going to make it through 2015. He was in such bad shape. He'd been in 3 plane crashes, and both his feet were just destroyed. This is when he was a kid. He still holds, on his death, he still held 15 world records for flying around the world solo in his dad's Learjet. And no one's been able to beat him on that. And because of my friendship with John Lear, I met Bob Lazar before he went to work out in the desert. And before he went to work out in the desert, you couldn't put a gun to Bob Lazar's head and convince him that UFOs were real. And he changed quite a bit over a year's time, from when I first met him to when he was a silhouetted, voice-altered person named Jared that was being interviewed by another friend of mine, George Knapp. So I've been a friend of Bob for 34 years, 33 years. He's who he says he is. But I've had a love affair with Area 51, with things that go bump in the night, with the Lockheed Skunk Works. They have an incredible group of people there. But this last June, I mentioned I had my 75 Years of the Skunk Works book came out last summer. And Lockheed bought, I think, 36 books. And I went in and had a book signing at the Skunk Works. And I spent 2.5 hours with Jeff Babion, who was the vice president, general manager of the Skunk Works. He's since retired. But he said his favorite books in the whole wide world are my Blackbird book from Schiffer and my 75 Years from Osprey. And and if anybody listening to this interested in the book, it's available on Amazon.
You're just going to have to pay extra for the shipping because it weighs about 6 pounds.
Yes. It's I cover 43 programs, and there's probably 43 programs I don't know about. But I had a chance to spend 2.5 hours with Jeff. And we're heading over to the U2 operation after he gave me a tour of areas he could of the Skunk Works. I have a picture of me standing on the work platform for the X-59, which is the sonic boom test aircraft that will fly, I think, later this year, maybe early next year. As we're heading over to Site 2, where the U2s are, and we're back of the limousine, and I look Jeff right in the eye. I'm about 2.5 feet from him. I'm looking right in his eyes. Okay, I said, okay, Jeff, what alien technology is being utilized in today's Skunk Works airplanes? And he looked me straight back in the eye. If he'd been a politician, I'd have known him in a lying SOB, but he's not a politician. He's an engineer. He looked me straight in the eye and said, Jim, I am not aware of any alien technology that's utilized in any program that Lockheed has built or designed. He said, it doesn't mean that something was created before I got here. And it's so deeply black, I really have no need to know. He said, my primary job is to look forward, not to look to my past. But that's one of the reasons he enjoys my Skunk Works book, because it does give a glimpse into Lockheed Skunk Works past and the 43 programs that I cover. So, he looked at me and said, I'm a firm believer. I can't imagine that we're the only ones. He said, but the official policy of Lockheed Martin is there's no comment on things that go bump in the night or things you can't explain. It's just nothing to say.
Jim, I got a question for you.
Sure.
Of the stuff that you have, so the great thing, and you've been at it so much longer than me, but one of the things I've enjoyed most over the last couple of years doing interviews along with hosting interviews is getting people who are in the know about stuff that, like, hey, I can't tell you this on air, but I'll tell you off air. And the amount of stuff that I think probably even I've learned, what you've learned in as much time as you've had in with the groups you've traveled in, of what you've heard over the years. And granted, you've probably maybe even included in some of your writings, but is there anything that you were surprised about that was not revealed, but you were able to talk about it later? Or is there anything just coming that you haven't been able to talk about that's been in your head?
Well, no, I don't keep anything to myself, because if I drop over dead tomorrow, what I have kept in my brain, because it's so special, is lost. So when I find out something, there's a few people that I make sure that they know what I found out. And I haven't found out that much, but I get, Michael Schratt is a very dear friend of mine, and, I share everything I know with him. And we were on last night. Yeah, we were on last night Michael was only on for about 45 minutes and he had to go. But no, I share everything that I do with the world. because it does me no good. Now, I'm not in this for fame and fortune. My God, I said, I can't tell you how much money I spent on transportation, on food, on lodging, on computers and cameras.
Yep.
And it's, if you broke down what I got paid per hour for all the books, my 29 books that I have, actually only 28 of them are published. The 29th, I'm waiting for the Navy to get back to me on. And, but if you broke down, I maybe make 2, maybe 3 cents an hour if I'm lucky.
That's good money.
Yes. Yeah. But again, I do it because this is a love affair and it's a passion of mine. And I'm blessed. I'm blessed with a very good memory. I'm blessed to have access to people that I don't know how it became on Ben Rich's good list. I don't know how I became on Jack Gordon, who was the president of the Skunk Works, or Sherm Mullen, who was the president of the Skunk Works, or Jeff Babion, who is the equivalent of the president, but they don't have that title anymore. It's vice president, general manager of the Skunk Works, and Ben Rich. I mean, Ben and I talked once a quarter for 25 years.
Or you're giving them good free PR at, 2 cents an hour. That's, with those books and everything. And just so everybody knows, if you're wondering if we had Michael Schratt on this podcast, we did. He actually was our season 2 opener. So if anybody's interested in listening to that episode, you can find Michael's interview with us back at episode 1, season 2. So, and that was amazing. And I did take some of his artwork because he did a presentation for us that was absolutely phenomenal. The guy is out of this world.
He's the best there is.
He is. He's probably one of the best researchers, and he just puts it out there. There's no personal opinion or anything like that. He'll just present you with what he finds. And I did put our YouTube up with that interview, and then interlaced some of his photographs out of his book with his permission on YouTube. So you can actually go watch that presentation when he's talking about a certain craft and they're trying to cut into it. I did put the artwork up that he had commissioned to demonstrate how that was being done by the witnesses that were there and things like that. So if anybody wants to check that out, that is available.
The other thing, when it comes to Michael Schratt, and I've known Michael for about 25 years, and he's like my kid. And I talk to him at least 2 or 3 times a week, and I have for the last 10 or 15 years. And he doesn't interject his own opinion. He's like Sergeant Friday from Dragnet days. I want the facts, ma'am, just the facts. And that's what he presents. And he just I was going to go out and visit him, but with gas the way it was, I didn't really want to. I have another couple of road trips, planned, so I had to just back off that. But he spent 3 days in Roswell. He went to their archives and he scanned over 10,000 sets of documents, and they're going to be available online once he gets it all organized. And he is the best researcher. He has over 100 4-drawer filing cabinets filled. He has 231 or 232 3-wing binders of the 8-inch thick 3-wing binders that are filled with illustrations and supporting documents. He has a book that came out. It's called Dark Files, a pictorial history of lost, forgotten, and obscure UFO encounters. It's available on Amazon. And it's, I think it's $27, but he covers, I think he said 60 some odd programs or events. These are actual events. He has full color illustrations along with the supporting documents. And it's book 1. He could probably do 100 books. And I'm the one who pushed him hard on this, that he had to do it. And he's very pleased with it. And he has a YouTube channel. It's Blue Room Media. So you go to YouTube, go Blue Room Media, and he usually covers 3 or 4 historical events per session, and he has been doing them 4 or 5 a week. So this is his entire world revolves around retrieving information, tracking people down. And he's the only one who's doing it. I did it for 45 years, 50 years. Yeah, I'm 77. I have bad knees. I have a fast car that I can get me places. But there has to be some young blood go out there and snoop on the government. People need to push our government to demand answers to things, and they're not. And it's if something were happened to Michael, there's no one that's following his footsteps.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that would like to say that they are, but in reality, I don't think so. Not to the quality that Michael does. It's just amazing.
Michael makes a presentation on an event. You're going to see full illustrations of what the first person eyewitnesses saw. He'll recreate that based on their notes or based on their him interviewing them. And he has a complete package on these events. Now, one thing he's going to start working on with Dr. Stephen Greer is there are over 180 identified crash retrievals starting at 19. I think the earliest one was before World War II, so it was early 41 or early 40 that they've recovered crashed saucers and crashed sites, and he's going in that with both feet. And he said, the problem that he's run into, and all of us are running into it, is we're being beaten by the Grim Reaper. People who experienced this stuff back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, they're at the end of their time on this planet. And so it's important that anybody who in your audience that may be listening to this, if you have firsthand knowledge, get hold of somebody. Get on your site, get on Michael Schratt's site, get on MUFON or whatever. But let it be known, because we need people to. I think a lot of people backed away from the UFO talking about UFOs because they were ridiculed, and now it's mainstream. It's no longer, you're no longer an idiot for believing in UFOs. Now, like I said earlier, Ben Rich and I were like pen pals, but we used telephone versus writing letters. And just before Ben passed away, he was at USC Medical Center. He was dying from esophageal cancer at being around all the nasty solvents associated with low-observable stealth coatings. And it was about 10 days before he died. And I called him up to see how he was doing. And I just received the book that he wrote with Leo Janos, My Time at the Skunk Works. And we were talking about friends and other things. And he said, and then we finally got around to things that go bump in the night. He said, Jim, we have things out in the desert. This is quoting Ben Rich as he spoke to me. He said, Jim, we have things out in the desert that's 50 years beyond what you can comprehend. Not what you think you can build in 50 years, but what you can comprehend. And I can comprehend a hell of a lot. I have quite an imagination. And he said, if you've seen movies like Star Trek or Star Wars, we've been there, done that, or decided it wasn't worth the effort. I said, Ben, you want to continue on that? And he said, no. And he had the nerve to die on me 10 days later. So I was really disappointed.
Yeah, can you give us some more evidence other than that? I mean, come on. Can you point to where the aliens are, man?
Yeah, well, S4.
Yeah.
That's what Bob said he was. And there's a gentleman who was the facility manager there for 5 years. And he asked guys that were still working out there, do you ever recall seeing or hearing of a guy named Bob Lazar on the, flying on the black and whites, the Janet flights from McCarran into Area 51? And said 2 or 3 guys said, yeah, I remember the name. I saw it on the manifest. So, and there is a place called S4. The facility manager saw equipment designated, came into Area 51, unloaded off an aircraft, and then trucked to another location somewhere there, close to Area 51, which could be S4. So the stuff is out there. Another thing, right after he retired, and this had to be 92, 93 timeframe. He was a keynote speaker at UCLA. It was the aeronautical school postgraduate conference. And he got up here as a keynote speaker. And at the very end, basically he said, we have the ability today to take ET home. Now think about that statement for a second. This is 30 years ago. 30 years ago. So we have the ability to take ET home. But our government, it's buried so deep into our government black programs, our government will not release that information. And he found it very frustrating. And that's what he told me. And then 3 years later, just before he died, or 4 years later, just before he died, is what he said. Yeah, we have things out in the desert that's 50 years beyond what you can comprehend. So the stuff is out there. There's too many people. The gentleman that was the facility manager at Area 51 was a retired lieutenant colonel, SR-71 pilot named Dave Fruhoff. And Dave Fruhoff, in late 71, early 72 timeframe, he chased a UFO in an SR-71 and left him in the dust. Now, this is before anything that was, super fast or whatever it is. The only thing out there that could match the speed of an SR-71 is the CIA version of the A-12 Blackbird. That was it. And Dave was on a night training mission out of Kadena, Okinawa. This is when the Vietnam War was still hot and heavy. He's going straight. There's a 3/4 moon off his left-hand side. He's at 78,000 feet at Mach 2.7. And all of a sudden something catches his eye, and he looks off to the right side of the SR-71. And he said about 5 or 6 miles off to his right, and 3,000 to 5,000, maybe 6,000 feet above him was a craft that was reflective. He's getting glints off a 3/4 moon, is reflecting off the surface of this craft. He couldn't make out the shape because the glare of the instruments inside the cockpit was too great. And he didn't want to open his visor to see it without the visor, without the problem with the glare. So he gets on the radio, and he contacts Kadena, Okinawa, the command post, on secure voice, and wanted to know if we had another SR-71 up. And he said, "No, you were at the briefing. You're the only one up." He said, "Okay, I'm going to take a closer look." So he advances the throttles. Now at Mach 2.7 at 78,000 feet, the airplane is an absolute minimum afterburner. The Blackbird loves to fly fast, and it flies within about 98% of its mission envelope is considered. That's his operational envelope. He doesn't have much margin. So Mach 3.2 is almost as fast as a Blackbird can go. They've gone to Mach 3.43. There's been some rumbling saying, no, we've gone to Mach 3.5. I know an A-12 went Mach 3.56, which is 2,391 miles an hour in 1963. It was A-12 number 128, and it was flown by Jim Eastham. And it was envelope expansion airframe. And he was trying to get up to Mach 3, and he was having a real hard time, and he was in bad air. And so he dropped the nose, and when he dropped the nose, he redlined everything, and immediately when it started hitting back to the farm, so to speak. And when they took the instrumentations out, all the tapes and whatever, they figured that for maybe 15 or 20 seconds, he was at Mach 3.56. But the airplane will blow out the inlets above Mach 3.33. you run the risk of having a single or dual unstart, and that will make you empty your bowels. It's pretty violent. Lou shock, the first time it happened to Lou, one engine would go on unstart and the airplane would yaw real hard to one side. Then the other engine would go into unstart. That one, the one that went under unstart, restarted. So the airplane is going back and forth. It was banging his head so hard it broke his faceplate, which means if he had to bail out, he was dead man. And the only reason he was able to recover, he's one who designed the layout for the cockpit. He's holding the stick with one hand. He put his hand on the instrument panel and worked his way down until he found the switches for the manual extension of the inlet cones. Those things moved back 26 inches. And he made them all go full forward. That stopped the dual unstart. It created both engines unstart. It was like hitting a brick wall. And he was able to recover the aircraft. His backseater did mess his pants. It scared him. He thought the airplane was coming apart. So, but Dave said that when he started getting close to this UFO, this unidentified thing, whatever it was, when he was still 1,000 or 2 feet, 1,000 or 2 below this craft, and still a mile or 2 away, this thing took off at about a 30-degree angle of attack and left him in the dust like he was heading the other direction. He figured it left him at about 8 to 10,000 miles an hour, and he lost sight of it between 180 and 200,000 feet. So that's 1972. So in 1980, he retired from the Air Force, and he got a job as facility manager at Area 51. So after he waited a while, because you don't ask a lot of questions when you first get there. But he knew most of the guys that were there, because you work in the real spooky programs. It's a very, very small community. Whether you're working at McDonnell Douglas, Lockheed, Grumman at the time, any of those companies, Boeing, those guys, the guys that work on the real spooky stuff are a handful of very, very special people. So after he was there for about a year, he started asking questions, and he finally he was at the club one night, and he said to a buddy of his, he said, "Did we ever flight test an airplane here that could outrun an SR-71?" I said, "I'm talking about back in the early 70s." He said, "No, it wasn't flown out of here." So it was Dave's response to when I asked him. He said, "Do you believe in UFOs?" And that was the story he gave me. So, are UFOs real? Yes, they are. Are they alien? I would have to say not all of them, but all it has to be is one.
Yeah, and I know Jared's of the opinion of the not aliens, it's us kind of a thing. But I did want to jump back to something that you said, Jim, and that was when you talk about ridicule and people getting their stories out there. Now it's become kind of mainstream and things. Here in Michigan, we experienced the dreadful 1966 Project Blue Book swamp gas incident, which is a joke that has permeated the whole UFO and now UAP culture as a joke. And here in Michigan, we've had all kinds of UFO sightings and things that have gone on. And as far as I know, we don't have any test ranges and things like that for any kind of secret aircraft. But what I do know I'll give a shout out to Ray Szymanski on his book, Swamp Gas My Ass. And where he details about how Michigan was a base for tactical nuclear weapons that were to be fired off of fighter jets if Russian military aircraft decided to come over the North Pole and drop nuclear bombs here in Michigan and down through the states. One of the tactics was to take these nuclear missiles on these fighters and launch them from the Air National Guard bases here. And they would basically, as a Hail Mary, launch these nuclear tipped missiles off of these jets and try to blow up the squadron of fighters in the air, or the bombers in the air, using, nuclear detonation. You get your EMF plus the whole nuclear thing, but it was like a kind of like a Hail Mary last minute kind of a thing that they would try to do. Are you familiar with the 1966 thing that went on here? And
no, but I'm familiar with using a nuclear warhead to stop a Soviet bomber formation. There were 3-man Blackbirds, the A-12, which was CIA. They actually had 9 airframes. You had two additional ones were modified to be drone carriers. Those are the MD-21s. There's only one example left, and that's at the Museum of Flight in Seattle.
Was that the big drone that sits in the back between the
Yes.
Vertical stabilizers?
Correct. It's about a 50-foot long Mach 4 spy plane, and that was built and designed to overfly the Soviet Union and China. Because the terms and conditions of Gary Power's release was the cessation of all manned overflights of the Soviet Union and its allies. So we needed an unmanned system, but there was, they built 38 D-21 drones. These were unmanned. They were baby Blackbirds. There's several at museums around the country. You go to the Air Force Museum at Wright-Patt, they have a D-21. Of course, the Museum of Flight, and most of the places that have Blackbirds may have a D-21 as well. The program was initiated as a stopgap because satellites weren't all that hot, and Kelly Johnson, even though they had 4 launches over the former Soviet Union, over China, not the Soviet Union, over China. And they didn't get anything back that was usable. Kelly Johnson referred to the D-21 program, which was called Tagboard, as his most successful failure. He said, we matched state-of-the-art airframe and propulsion systems with 1940s electrical relays and stuff like that. I mean, the electronics were ancient. The airframe and the propulsion were state-of-the-art. And to marry the two was a real challenge. So it was, they had there's 17 of the 38 airframes were left. One of them doesn't have any leading edges. All the composite were damaged, and that's sitting here at Davis-Month. And there's still a couple D-21s here, plus there's still a couple at NASA Dryden or NASA Armstrong now. So that's just a unique, and it was. At the time they were working on the D-21 program, it was called Tagboard. It was more classified than the Manhattan Project that built and designed the first atomic bomb. So it was, and I'm the only one who's ever written anything on it. World Air Power, I think there's second or third volume. I have a thing on Hiding in the Shadow of Black, I think is the name of the article. And it's 18,000 words and photos that have never been published on the program. And it came from me. So that's stuff I like to do. But of all the stuff that's being seen around the world nowadays, one of the big things, and you mentioned earlier, is something that's been referred to as the TR-3B.
That makes me angry. Because every time that somebody says that they've seen, including my wife and I, who've seen a flying triangle here very close to Detroit, it was very low to the ground, basically hovering, silent, 3 glowing orbs, one in each corner, and the thing had to be 250 to 300 feet across and did not make a sound, and it could rotate in place. I mean, just crazy. And every time I get these debunkers that will go, well, that's just the TR-3B. That's just the TR-3B. And you being the expert, I was like, if there's anybody that knows anything about what this thing is or supposed to be, because what I found on it, to me, it doesn't jive with what people, especially here in Michigan, with these giant triangles are seeing and the capabilities.
the real big ones, I would have to believe they're not from us, but there are quite a number of cell phone videos of TR-3Bs. If they have formation lights, if they have a red and green light on the tips, I got to believe that's man-made. Even though you're building something spooky, the F-117, which was our first operational stealth fighter, it has red and green lights. They don't turn them on during combat. The B-2, it retracts its formation lights when it goes into combat, and it's a little diamond-shaped top to it, and it just comes out of the wing, and that's your formation lights. So if it appears to have flashing red or green tips, more than likely it is and I'd have to say without question, it's man-made. But it's the ones that aren't the huge ones. I mean, there was one that was videotaped over Sholo, Arizona. Sholo is not that far from where Travis Walton was abducted. And he's from Snowflake, Arizona, which is just right up the road from Sholo. It's at 7,000 feet out in altitude. But Doc Skinner sent me a video and said, is there anything you can do with this? And I said, well, I'll give it a try. And I started, changing the contrast and doing a bunch of other stuff. And this thing was a mile long. And it was, it wasn't an optical illusion. I mean, it was, as it passed behind trees, it was blocked out from the trees. This thing was huge, and it was only seen on a side view. It wasn't seen at the bottom, from the people who were looking at it. And there's so many people out there that never look up. When I live here in north of Tucson, we don't have any city lights here. So when the sun goes down and if the yard lights are turned off, it is dark. And I go out there every night with my dog and just sit there and watch the sky. And as much as I've been out in the desert looking for UFOs, and same here, I have to admit I have never seen anything I couldn't figure out, and that pleases me and disappoints me at the same time, because I can remember it's had to be like 92 or 93. I'm over at Tippecanoe Valley, due east, Area 51. I'm by the black mailbox. It's just a sliver of the moon. And there isn't a cloud in the sky, and it's just a real light, faint glow of twilight. And I'm standing there and I'm thinking to myself, okay, it's been said that the aliens could read your mind. They could, through telepathy. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there and I'm concentrating as hard as I can. I said, okay, I'm here. I have my Nikon in hand. Abduct me. I want to be abducted. But let me bring. Yeah, if you had a colonoscopy, it can't be any worse than what the aliens do to you. So I've had half a dozen of those. So I'm there, thinking real hard, abduct me, and nothing. But I know they're there. I know we're not alone. We'll get to the TR-3B again in a second, but I was a docent at Kitt Peak National Observatories outside of Tucson. It's the largest collection of optical telescopes in the world. They have 22 optical telescopes with the primary mirror. The smallest one is just used for the public to do some night viewing. It's a 12-inch primary mirror. But the biggest one up there is the Mayall. It's 4 meters. It's 13 feet across. And this mirror weighs 30,000 pounds. And it's ground to within a millionth of an inch of being a perfect parabolic reflector. But I was a docent. I went in there, and my job was to give them a tour of 4 of the significant telescopes, and one of them was the 2.1 meter telescope, and 2.1 meters is about 8 feet. So it has an 8-foot primary mirror, and the 2.1 was used remotely by Caltech using adaptive optics looking for exoplanets. They, for 5 years, using the 2.1 meter telescope with adaptive optics, they would shoot when they were starting to do their observations. They would shoot up a ultraviolet laser beam, and at exactly 18 miles, that thing has to be X number of centimeters across the beam, and it's monitored and adjusted 1,200 times a second. And there's the mirror that goes into the spectrograph is adjustable. There are actuators underneath that actually deform the mirror, and it has pretty close to the same resolution from Earth as the Hubble Space Telescope does in space. And the air over southern Arizona is turbulent free and pretty much free of dust. So it's a great place. And the mountaintop is at just under 7,000 feet. But just before I quit volunteering up there, we had a gathering of all the astronomers, all the telescope technicians, and all the docents were asked to come down to, they call it an NOAO. It's the National Optical Astronomy Observatories, and it's headquartered at the University of Arizona here in Tucson. And so is the mirror lab, the lab that makes all the really big mirrors for telescopes. And they had it was a beer and pizza, and they had the keynote, the head of the astronomy department, National Science Foundation, and he had just returned from a worldwide conference of all the astronomers around the world that are studying and looking for exoplanets. And based on proven mathematical formulas, and based on all the information from all these hundreds of telescopes that have been looking for exoplanets around the world, they came to the conclusion that for every star in the universe, there's 1.5 planets. Now, you can't cram that number in your head. You can't even cram the decimal points in there because they're just, or the commas, it's such a huge, huge number. And again, based on proven mathematical calculations and formulas, they calculate that there are 2 billion, that's with a B, 2 billion Earth-like planets orbiting a similar sized brown dwarf star as our sun in the inhabitable zone with liquid water. And to quote Jodie Foster in Carl Sagan's movie Contact, if we're the only ones, what a waste of space. So are UFOs real? Absolutely. To think that we're the only ones would be silly. We're an insignificant solar system in an insignificant galaxy in an insignificant corner of the universe. And we're only 4 billion years old, our galaxy. The universe is 13.6, 13.8 billion years old. Now, one of the things that the University of Arizona has done, at the Mirror Lab, they're building multiple new telescopes in Chile. They're 200 miles from the nearest city, so you don't have any light pollution. It's one of the driest places on the planet. And the telescopes are being built on top of a 16,000-foot mountain. So they're way, way up there. And I'm sure everybody, that's the technicians that were working up there and the construction people were all on oxygen. They would have to be. It's called the Giant Magellan Telescope. It will utilize 7 27-foot diameter mirrors, all focused on one secondary mirror. And they figure they will be able to look back in time to within 100,000 years of first light. That's when the first star decided nuclear fusion began. That's incredible.
Hey everyone, we hope you're enjoying the podcast. We're going to take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsors and some friends of the podcast.
Hi, this is Chris Lato of the Chris Lato YouTube channel, retired F-16 pilot turned UAP investigator, and you are listening to Wayne and Michelle on the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
What is up, you guys? It's your girl Gemma Jade from Gemma Jade YouTube, Moon Bear Oracle, Paranormal Chop Shop, and Spaced Out Radio After Hours Show. You're here listening to Wayne and Michelle with the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
Hi, everyone. This is Jared Murphy of NotAliens.com, and you are listening to Wayne and Michelle from Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
What's up, everyone? This is Burton.
And Aaron from Lost in the Dark podcast.
And raise your horns because you're listening to Wayne and Michelle from the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
Hi, this is Sev Talk from MUFON and the author of You Have the Right to Talk to Aliens and the host of Alien Spirit TV with Sev on YouTube. You're listening to Wayne and Michelle at the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
Hey there, it's Richard Serrett, occasional weekend guest host of Coast to Coast AM and host of The Conspiracy Show, and you're listening to Wayne and Michelle's Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
Hi, this is Terry Lynn Keel, Director of MUFON Memberships, investigator, demonologist, and author of Alien Healing, the true story of a benevolent extraterrestrial. And you're listening to Wayne and Michelle on the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Michael Schrett, military aerospace historian and private pilot, and you are listening to Wayne and Michelle at the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast, and we're glad to have you with us today.
Hi, this is Alexei Novitsky, and you're listening to Wayne and Michelle on the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast. What I'd like to show you guys is the infinite pool of experience and awareness, which can be found at luciuslabs.com. And it's a book that I've written after basically meditating for 27 years. Basically goes over modern physics. It takes you all the way from modern accepted physics to understanding that we live in a layering of conscious types within time and that our consciousness is eternal.
They're not sure what they're going to see. Every time they've been able to look deeper into areas that that they didn't know was there. If they thought they had 100 questions when they looked in it real deep, all of a sudden those 100 questions turned to 1,000 questions that haven't been answered. So they're not sure what they're going to find. I think on July 12th, the first images from the James Webb Deep Space Telescope will be made public. And from what I understand from friends of mine that at NASA, just in the testing part of it, said the resolution and the images are going to blow people away. And they'll be able to look at things we can't because they're looking at ultraviolet, infrared, outside of the visible spectrum. And it's even with it getting hit by meteorites, they said it didn't affect the resolution of the telescope at all. But we're not alone. We're not alone. We're not even close to being alone. There's been so many reports of alien craft going back 2,000-3,000 years. I mean, you look at petroglyphs, you look at the hieroglyphics in tombs in Egypt, in the Aztec areas, the Mayan areas, in Southeast Asia. There are depictions of things with humanoids with big heads, big eyes, and what appears to look like discs, or someone in a capsule with oxygen mask, like in a cockpit of a craft of some sort. And those and there's similar stone carvings of the same thing scattered all over the world. So, who built the pyramids? Who did some of the petroglyphs out in South America that are miles long and it can only be seen from space to make out what they are. And they're.
And Jared, that's where we're crossing over into some of your research and stuff. And what's interesting is that this is the first time you two have been together to be on a podcast together, but you both work with Lynn Hurley.
But yeah, the crossover, it is interesting now. Sorry, Wayne, where were you going with that?
Oh, I was just going to turn it over to you a little bit, but Jim, I need to know what you know about this TR3B thing, because it's one of those things that drives me crazy, and
it drives a lot of people crazy. What is it? Why
aren't we using it right now? Couldn't we be using this to help the Ukrainians and they would never know we were there?
During Desert Storm, I was activated, and my job was to read absolutely every single message to and from CENTCOM. That was from eyes only down to unclassified stuff. And I had a real high clearance for 27 years. And one of the things I was looking at is the operational listing. There was 3,000 airplanes every day were listed by serial number, by aircraft type, and by call sign. And I would look at that list every single day looking for something that wasn't supposed to be there. And these were classified, top secret and above. And I never, ever saw anything that wasn't already acknowledged in the world. And I was really disappointed. It doesn't mean that over and above in a compartmental environment that something wasn't going on that wasn't being reported to the Joint Chiefs and General Schwarzkopf. Schwarzkopf said at the beginning that, okay, if I'm going to head up this, politicians stay the hell out of my way or I'll quit. And that's probably the only reason it was relatively successful, because they needed it done. So
from your standpoint, there is no evidence of this TR3B being a real thing? Nothing you've seen, or do you think it's a piece of misinformation that's put out there to try to debunk and kind of poo-poo the whole flying triangle thing?
The disinformation in this world is running rampant. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's an active disinformation campaign going on the TR3B and UFOs in general. Now, it just came out today that there were 100 UFOs flying in and around a naval carrier task force group in the Pacific somewhere. And sailors are now coming out and saying, yeah, there was, this thing was 100 feet across. There were hundreds of them, and they were swarming the battle group. So no, we're not alone. I mean, the odds of us being the only ones are ridiculous. We can't be the only ones. And the other thing, if people say, why won't Jimmy Carter said he was going to release stuff, and next thing you know, he didn't say anything. Barry Goldwater was going to release everything if he became president, and then he became senator, and he was and he started the first UFO group. The very first UFO club, if you want to call it, was in Phoenix. and it was created by Barry Goldwater. And after he became a senator, and when he was running for president, all of a sudden, the UFO group that he had formed disappeared, and he would never acknowledge the fact that he was part of it. Jimmy Carter, the same thing. And there've been multiple presidents and candidates. I think even Obama said basically the same thing.
Yeah. Jim, did you ever get anyone at least confirming the various, or at least from observation? Do you have anybody that can say, well, I don't know about that specific plane or unidentified thing, but I will tell you we have this technology, and anyone separately say, well, we have this technology, and together would it make that technology?
Ben Rich, retired president of the Skunk Works, said in a public forum at UCLA, we have the ability, in 1993, I think it was the time frame, we have the ability to take ET home. Now think about that statement.
Right. Yeah. I mean, anti-gravity or whatever we can conceive of, whatever they're going to do in reference to, hyper, distant travel. Clearly there's a technology involved that's going to involve a way better understanding of energy, magnetism, frequencies, and waves and energy. I mean, there's indications of that, like you pointed out in our ancient ruins. To Wayne's point, people need to be able to go to websites very easily. So ironically, my website, Not Aliens, is strictly because it's easy to remember. But I've never said that there aren't space traveling anthropologists. But what's frustrating, what we started with in this, one of the things we mentioned right away at the beginning of this conversation is we have a society that not only is there a general, not for, I think, this audience or for anyone who's reading our books or your books or whatever, or listening to Wayne's show, the reality is we have a society that's not taught wisdom.
They're not taught to think. They're not taught
what to think.
They're not taught to think independent.
No. So I think it's hard for them to see technology. And then the problem is we have this, I would call it, in this age of this dying off of these initial experiencers, is we have a very broken, and literally there's for all those conspiracy people out there was an open secret of when we had the Industrial Revolution, the plan from the beginning is to create a docile, happy workforce that's satisfied with a watch after 20 years to go crank out parts in a factory. You can't do that with a wise thinking population. So the effort to dumb us down, irrelevant to even the current period, has been an effort since at least the Industrial Revolution in our education. So it's hard to have these experiences. And it's not that there aren't aliens. The issue, though, is all evidences in our past point to a worldwide global society that understood frequencies and energies way beyond where we are now. We have weird cuts in our genes. We have weird biotechnology things. We keep seeing sciences and advancements in our experiences now. You and I can go pick up a gene CRISPR, and by August, we could do some crazy crap in our garage, totally illegal. And then we can grab the new 3D printer that maybe one of those, if you can acquire things, Jim, then we need a general to get us a bio printer that we can print our own little fake alien.
And what makes you think they haven't done that?
That's exactly right. And so the other problem is that if you're a human being, there's I have a friend who just went to a tattoo convention, and he does body mods with not just all the piercings and hookings, but like the scarring, and there's people doing extreme body mods. And, it was Ray Kurzweil in The Singularity is Near in 2008 is talking about, the advent of technology and man. The reality is that the biotechnology, if it's an energy and frequency, like the mind control and you're aware of all the different airplanes that have direct mind contact and control. If you're an advanced human that has figured a lot more technology than we have, the reality is that thinking with your machine may be easier if you're translucent, small, with big eyes, with onboard infrared. There's a whole TED talk with a neuroscientist talking about, for 28 minutes, very informative, on how the human skin sees infrared signals and can actually understand it. So a way that we would connect with a very advanced machine, and the way we would move it, the way we would do 0 turns at Mach 20, maybe we need to be shorter. And with the right programming and gene technology, we keep having this dumb idea, this K through 12 idea that, well, we're on an evolutionary path. Well, when in reality, we've already been around for hundreds of thousands of years in a way where we may have already advanced to the point where the technology to mutate the human body, not out of evolution, but out of
we're going down the tubes now.
Yeah. Well, now we're basically at 15% consciousness. We're not the 90 or 80% conscious human race that was using active, not a religious, but an actual third eye. And we're connecting to biotechnology that we mistake for, errant Fortran programs that are now we call trees, were actually houses when they were programmed correctly. And, but we have all these worldwide evidences of all these different technologies that are past technologies. We don't understand them, but at the same time, it's not only in the grass plants and our genes themselves and our histories. We clearly have a recent, like you said, there's the Nuremberg incidents in 1500s. You have identical eyewitness accounts of aerial combat in Switzerland 20, 30 years later. And so we have this entire life, as far as we know, in modern history times, no matter how they've scrubbed it, we have this relationship with someone on this planet being more advanced. And it's not that we can't jump and think, we may have had alien contact or that we didn't leave the planet, which I think we did. The question is, if we would be honest, are the forces that are left, my question's the frustrating thing is, are we dealing with the good remnant humans? Are we dealing with advanced ancient humans that pissed off somebody already somewhere else? Did they come back? Who didn't get along with who, that they were fighting over Nuremberg into the 1500s? And who's to say that it wasn't the last of a social media crowd on a cruise ship that crashed 50,000 or 100,000 years ago? The planet got wrecked, and those are the people who rebuilt the technology that they were aware of. We don't even know if we're dealing with the best and the brightest advanced ancient humans. We could be dealing with the biggest jerks of their day.
Most of them are in DC, so...
Right. And then the other problem is like the joke about the whole anal probe. It's like, really? You guys have full control of the human genome and you need to experiment on us? Quite frankly, I just think it's errant teenagers who treat us like cattle for their 8th grade advanced ancient human project.
Right. And speaking of cattle, what do you got against cattle?
Right. Those poor guys.
It's like cattle mutilation. What's going on with that? I mean, why do you need to mutilate cattle?
Do you ever seriously, Jim, does anyone ever come across your desk with an answer privately about what is the real reason that they are going at cattle?
No,
it makes no sense.
It doesn't make sense at all. Mutilating humans, possibly to determine whether or not we may be an experiment. We may have been planted here from an alien race. Craft that are coming in today may be time travelers. They may be humans. They may be Americans that are 1,000 years from now, and they mastered the Stargate, and they're coming back in time to this century, one to see if they can fix. If they can stop World War III or World War IV, or they can create the next scamdemic or pandemic, excuse me. I don't know. There's so many ways you can look at what has been going on in the unknown aerial phenomena.
And I think you're absolutely right. And I think and let's jump back to what you guys were saying, as somebody like my wife and myself, who are in education, and we see the curriculums and the way things are done in schools and things like that. Your feelings are more important than facts. And, you don't need to learn how to think. It's what to think, and as a science teacher, I deal with that stuff and try to deprogram the kids, but it seems like it's been so ingrained over the last 100 years of be happy and push a button in a factory. You don't need to think. And then we give the kids all these cell phones to distract them and entertain them while their bodies are disintegrating, and they're pushing a button to make some kind of money, or they don't even care about that anymore. It's a teacher's worst nightmare to sit there and deal with, trying to entertain a kid to get them to learn something because they're watching TikTok, or or whatever the case may be. I mean, I could go on for hours with this, and I don't want to turn it into that, but let's say we've got a population that's like that, and you can throw and overstimulate them with so much information that you can no longer decipher what is real and what isn't. And so you might have a time traveling person, but who would believe you? It's not entertaining enough. Yeah, whatever. You could have ancient people that were very high tech. Yeah, but how does that affect me now? It's very easily dismissed. So you could have all of these things. And I think the problem runs into is that we don't ask the right questions. And what those questions are, I don't know yet, but I think that there's something missing with, and maybe when you get to, my age, 50 something and up, you start thinking,
I'm 77.
Well, you start looking around and going, there's something wrong. There's people are just turned off or they're angry. There's like no in between. Nobody touches the grass. Nobody looks up, like you were saying. Nobody's really smelling the air they're breathing. So how are we going to figure out anything about UAPs and UFOs? Yeah. And these things could be just they're already operating with, impunity how they want to.
Yeah. Well, I was the associate curator at the Pacific Aviation Museum in Pearl Harbor. I lived in Waikiki for 4 years. I could walk down Kalakaua on any day, and there's 10,000, 15,000 people, crammed on, both sides of the street. And 90% of them are like this. They're staring at their stupid cell phones. You go on the beach, and here's some gorgeous women out there in some very, very small bikinis. And you'll see these guys. I mean, they're staring at, they might as well be in downtown Detroit or downtown Newark, for all that matters, as far as the sights and sounds of, and Hawaii is one of the most beautiful places on the planet. I mean, it's that way most of the time.
Yeah, I was there, when I was like 10 years old. So like 40 some years ago. And I remember going to the memorial, and man, I can't imagine going now and then just seeing people maybe take a couple pictures and then they would just be back on their phones, and not even knowing, the memorial or what it stands for or what happened or any of those things. It's just, we're given a little snippet of history and then we run with it.
When my son's 46 today, but when he was in seventh grade, he's a bicentennial baby. He was born in 76. And it was my son, and I think he had 5 of his buddies over the house. They're all in 7th grade. They're all good students. I forget, there was something on the radio or something on TV about the original 13 colonies. So I asked the boys, all of them smart, all of them A students, pretty much. He said, can any of you name all 13 of the original colonies? Well, it was a blank stare. It was like saying, I want you to do your homework in C++ or Fortran or Super Basic. What the hell is that? That was the response. I said, can any of you name any one of the original states? Nothing. I said, how about some of the explorers for this, for North America? You have Sir Francis Drake, you have Magellan, you have Ponce de Leon, you have Lewis and Clark. And one of the boys said, isn't that a rock group from England back in the 60s? I said, you're half right. It was a Dave Clark 5. So no. So I called the director of curriculum of Eden Prairie Schools. And, Jared's familiar with Eden Prairie.
I am.
It's a very good school system.
It's considered a very good school system.
And I got hold of the director of curriculum. She's a graduate from Berkeley, 1968. I said, when everybody in the world is telling their population, their children, what a great country they're at, this is the greatest country in the world. Oh, we can't say that. They'd make every other country second rate. I said, right. And he said, no. So we talk about local things. We don't talk about world history. We don't talk about history of the country. It's not important. Important is your self-well-being. And I started calling her sweetheart And she finally said, "Mr. Goodall, our conversation isn't over. You may leave." When I challenged her one time too many. So I knew the principal. My first wife and I were active in PTA and school functions. So I called the principal of the high school and I said, "May I come to the school? I want to take a look at your history book," because they teach history, U.S. history, one semester in their junior year of high school. When I grew up in Mountain View and Los Altos, we started in first grade learning, learning how America was discovered, the original, the 13 colonies, the expansion west, and and everything that goes along with it. So I go to the principal's office, and I knew the guy for 15, 18 years. He was happy to see me. He said, "Yeah, here's your pass. You can go in the library. They know you're coming." So I got the history book. I started going through it. There's no mention of December 7th, 1941 in the beginning of World War II. No mention at all that the Japanese attacked us. The other thing is Vietnam. Now, there's two sides to every war. I mean, there are pros and cons of getting into a conflict. But the chapter on Vietnam looked like it was written by Jane Fonda. No, I'm just sorely disappointed in the education system. And I got so disgusted with Eden Prairie schools that I decided to spend $600 a month and send my son to Bunnell St. Margaret's. And he got a great education. Oh, because my gosh, they teach responsibility and morals and ethics.
Well, what if those history books and things that we were given back when we were kids in early 1900s was already pre-programmed to get us here today and covering up other histories of and Jared and I have talked about this, and this is something I'm really interested in is, ancient history and ancient civilizations that go back to the Amazon to who was here before, the last ice age, and, all of those things that could have existed, which probably do, but because there's no money in it, nobody really, does the research. I know Jared is doing a lot of boots on the ground at his own expense and looking at these things.
Yeah, as I did for 50 years, as Michael Schratt does every day. I mean,
Jim, if you got a procurement abilities, there's some things I'll need some help with for some equipment for South America, because I do field work and in order to prove this out, there is technology in the ground, but we're going to have to talk off air because Mr. Procurement, I don't know if I have to ring a bell or put like a bat signal up, but we have
to
chat.
Somebody from the Air Force to help out.
Well, it's interesting because there's this relationship that the history doesn't matter, but the questions you're trying to answer about what appears to be advanced technology that dates back 2,000-3,000 years to Roman times and whatever, or petroglyphs.
100,000 years.
Right. You have the petroglyphs, like Lynn just got married, and there's a monument in Utah with, literally aliens drawn on the walls. And so we've had a relationship with what appears to be, and again, it's not that there's not aliens, but we have frequency and energy-based polygonal constructions that can cancel and manage earthquakes, stone spheres that have the same properties that are being studied finally in Europe, and places that are actually starting to do the material science work to show, including Dr. Joseph Davidovitz for geopolymer research, that there is some very advanced technologies, not just in the ground, but in us. And with these ancient peoples comes also this juxtaposition of literally stuff flying in the air that is not clandestine military. It is something else. And all of it somehow relates to our current 10 to 15% state of consciousness. How can you discern anything if you're drunk at a bar? We are on sober 10 to 50% of a brain capacity with various, depending on our gene expressions, various abilities, our conscious connection to the collective human consciousness, whatever it is that makes individually our discernments or wisdoms or skill sets in smarts. We're all misfiring. We're all looking at this sober drunk.
And there are technologies that you and I possess, our capabilities, I should say, that you and I possess that we have no clue of. My mom, I grew up in the Mountain View, Los Altos area. My mom's 100% Sicilian.
Right.
And she was born on Halloween, and she could put a curse on you real easy. But we'd be sitting in the living room or having breakfast or lunch or whatever, and my mom would say, it feels like earthquake weather. And within 24 hours, we have a measurable earthquake.
There you go.
Now, every single one that she ever said we were going to have, it feels like earthquake weather, we've had one. Now, she didn't get them all, but all of them that she said that it was coming happened within 24 hours. For 7 years, I had a recurring dream of being in downtown San Francisco during a major earthquake. I told my first wife, who still lives in Minnesota, that I'm in downtown San Francisco. I'm staying. Now I have family in the Bay Area, so I wouldn't spend $150, $250 a night to stay in San Francisco, or even back in the day. And I had this. I said I can see the bridges collapsing, freeways collapsing, and I see buildings broken over. And did it for 7 years, and all of a sudden on the it was October 17th, I think it was, when they had the Loma Prieta earthquake. It was 7 point something on the Richter scale. And I finally got a hold of my wife, my ex-wife, and she says, "My God," they said, "what you said was talking about for the last half dozen or so years, actually came to pass." But I had another one, which it was too outrageous. I never told anybody. Said I saw wide-body jumbo jets crashing into the World Trade Center. I had that vision for about 10 years.
Huh.
And it was just too crazy to mention to anybody. But my mom, I could bring a kid over and the kid just say, "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Goodall," and that was it. And she'd give him a hug. You'd go, and she would tell me everything about him, his type of, the family he's with, everything, without her even meeting him for the very, very first time. My grandfather, Sicilian, was in charge of the fishing fleet in San Francisco Bay, all the way down to San Pedro. He was, they had to go to Alaska. They'd be gone for 5 months. This is around the turn of the century. I'm talking about 1903, 1904 timeframe. And if you fell overboard up in Alaska fishing, you were considered dead. And there was no communication. But my grandmother was the matriarch of the clan, so to speak. And the wives of the fishing fleet, all the fishermen would come to see my grandmother, and it's Angelina said, "In your dreams tonight, could you ask your long dead great aunt how Giuseppe is doing? How much money is in his pay envelope?" Because they paid cash, and it was always different. And she would tell him. And then one night she woke up at about 3:00 in the morning screaming, and woke up all the kids. And they came running in and said, "Mama, what's wrong?" I said, "Papa just fell overboard, but he's okay." You fall in water, if you're anchored or you're still fishing with seiner boats or whatever, you fall in the water, the currents are so strong they would never catch up with them, and the water's so cold you'd die of hypothermia. And his foot got stuck in the net, and she marked it on the calendar when he fell, what the time was, and about where.
Yeah, this is total confirmation. Part of what I write about is that you can't say that, well, this religion has this thing, and or this science, or this, second sight, exactly stuff like this. Second sight, remote viewing. There's all these different modalities that say, "Oh, this is paranormal," or "This is alien," or whatever it is. The reality is that none of it, all of it, can't be a little right. There has to be a common base technology and answer to this global mystery, which is really a giant game of archaeological clue. And these examples confirm, as usual, just constantly tabling the facts, that superhuman abilities were standard issue. Synesthesias, our ability to connect through a collective human consciousness, not an unconscious one, but a collective conscious human consciousness that may have been connected through a way more engineered and terraformed planet. These are all these abilities like Wim Hof, Stig Severinsen, the ability for us to consciously control our inflammatory response, to not die in a cold water environment, to actually be fine. All of these things are technologies that when you table them all and you look at it collectively, it stops being paranormal, it stops being religious, and it looks like you are dealing with way more advanced human genetic technology that we just have forgotten and have deified and mystified and don't deconstruct. Yet, meanwhile, we have weapons controls on an F-22 with brain power. And we think, boy, no one's ever thought of that. And
look at what they do with special operators, like Navy SEALs are the famous ones. They stick them in cold water until they learn how to deal with it. And then they make it's no big deal. That's part of their operations. And these are just guys that happen to make it through, Bud school and survive the training. But, they stick those guys in water. They run them for 7 days with like 4 hours of sleep straight to weed out the very bottom. And it's like, are they really weeding out the bottom, or are they able to get these guys to crack and tap into something that's always been there? And then Wim Hof shows up and he's like, breathe like this. And you're like, take a cold shower every morning for, just straight up cold. And it's like, holy crap.
Up in Kotzebue, which is the north shore of Alaska, the Eskimos, they'll break the ice and jump in the water.
Yep.
And the kids are playing in this water. The water's 29 degrees. Their skin is bright red.
Yep.
And they're just having a good time. The air, the outside air temperature's in the 30s, and they're not cold.
You can see those toddlers in Russia doing it. They literally outside playing in 20 below snow in diapers. And I've done it, Jim. I've turned bright red because I've met Wim Hof. I've done the training, and I've literally been red as a lobster due to cold water, doing a breathing technique that I'm seeing geometric patterns. And I'm telling you, your senses and what you can tap into, these are not accents. What your family was doing, these remote viewings, again, abilities that we chalk up to, it's random genetic synesthesias. It's like, no, these are not random abilities. And we're witnessing it when we see UFOs, when we see these technologies, when we have these experiences where suddenly someone speaks Spanish or French and they've never heard a word of it, but they're just randomly doing it because of a spiritual experience, or they've tapped into a collective system with genetic memories that tie back to the beginning of all humanity. And through some unpackaging of a partially broke zip file, they connected to something that, again, we're currently unconscious of it, but there's too many things where when you table all the out of place, out of time artifacts, all the UFOs, the vernaculars and the modalities. I don't have a problem with somebody saying, it's a UFO or was a miracle. Everybody grows up with some modality. I grew up Catholic, and it's, Blaine, and that's fine. We could go into some sub stories.
Oh yeah.
And so
my nemesis was Sistemir Christopher.
Oh, there you
look
go.
under she had jack boots, and I know she had a tan shirt with a little red armband.
I bet. And my mom was left-handed, so she went to Holy Spirit.
Okay.
And Jim will know that, but that's, she came home late once, and that was to my grandmother. And my grandfather, by the way, he was in the 7th Armored Division under Patton. He landed at D-Day in a tank, was a tank commander through Belgium and Holland and France for Battle of Bulge and all the way to Berlin. He was in a tank that entire time.
Okay.
And quite a guy, all French, didn't speak English. He spoke French till he was 8 years old, and then learned English because he lived on a farm around White Bear. But my grandmother wanted to know why the hell my mom had come home late. And when my mother told her that battle axe nun had kept her over to train her to not write in the devil's hand, my grandmother went and had a chat with that nun.
Oh.
My mother was never late again.
Yeah.
Coming home.
We were talking about, use what the brain can do. I had a roommate of mine named Don Avery, and this is back in the 60s, and he would start to think something and I would say it.
There you go.
Or I would be thinking something, he would say it. So he went out and got an ESP book. And this thing had a chart where there were 7 symbols, like 3 dots and 3 wiggly lines with a straight line in the bottom. And he says, I'm in the other room. We're resting. We're going to go out and party that night. So I'm just leaning back, relaxed. He said, I'm going to put my finger on a shape, on something. I want you to describe it. And he went he went over the list twice. So there were 20 objects, there were 20 things. I got 19 out of 20. And the only reason I didn't get 20 out of 20 is because he used the same shape twice in a row. So I said, well, that can't be right. He just had that. Also, it had it right. But I lost track of him for 40 years. Yeah, we went different directions. And I knew he went to work for Johnson Wax. So I know they're out of Kenosha, Wisconsin. So now there's the internet. And I see a Donald J. Avery, Kenosha, and a few other places, Hawaii and such. So I hit on the name. It gives me a mailing address, no phone number, but no email. So I sent a postcard on this. Let's say this is the 10th of the month. And I figured it'd take 3 days to get there. He's in Fallbrook, California, north of San Diego. The day that I found his address, his wife, Meredith, said, Don, did you ever know whatever happened to your old roommate, Jim Goodall? I said, yeah, I know you talk about him a lot, every now and then. You ever know what happened to him? And he said, no, he fell off the face of the earth like most people did. 3 days later, Meredith comes in to Don's office. He said, Don, remember we were talking about Jim Goodall and wonder what happened to him? He said, yeah, here's a postcard from him. Just arrived today.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do that a lot. I run into people that I have never known, and all of a sudden I connect with them.
Yep. And this is not, I don't think any of this is accidental. These all these stories, when we add them all up, all the ESP, all the remote viewing, all of it, there's a science and there's something in the ether that I always say it's banging on the blinky board. Bang on the left, you get a green light, bang on the right, you get a whatever different color light. And then somebody walks up in 1,000 years and says, why are you banging on the 747 control panel? And then somebody yells, heretic, burn him. And then and God forbid you pray to the blinky board and you even get it 40% right.
Yeah.
We're screwed. And so we've related to these different fallen. And again, one of the indicators is, we're looking to the stars. Meanwhile, we have cities sunken like off of Cuba that couldn't have been above water for at least 50,000 years. And when I started my book 5 years ago, before it came out, it took 3.5 years for me to do the first one because it covers a lot of this.
It took me 50 for my first one.
Oh, thank God. Now I'm feeling better. You finally came full circle. It made me feel better about 29 books, 100 other contributions that you've done.
Right.
Thank you for laser guiding my, it sounded better when it was just 100, but I think that there's an overall, 3.5 years ago, they were saying Göbekli Tepe is, there's organics on the site. I tell everyone always screenshot when they find something on the internet because they were commonly saying Göbekli Tepe, it's one of 6 sites and it's 15 to 28,000 years old, although they found organics that are 36,000 years old. Guess what's never in the vernacular anymore? Now, suddenly, I watched over months where suddenly they were saying, well, it's at least 12,000 years old. Like, what happened to the other 18 to 28,000? Where's the narrative? How did that change when you guys know it's much older? And now common science, standard academia, and alternative history has married and went, well, we'll just say it's 12. It's like, but that's not what you were saying.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, look at these large megalithic stones with these nice relief carvings on them. Just look at those and try to figure out what those are while we sweep everything up.
Well, and then, the same people who built those columns built like the little rubble wall between them. They just gave up after the columns,
Right.
So it's a constant fight to figure it out that there's a history here that involves just like now, there's 150 tribes. They're still breaking in ice. They're still being primitive. Well, if we all went away and all this technology did, there are still people that would show signs to archaeologists in the future that, oh, look, there's a bunch of Neolithic, Eolithic people here. Meanwhile, we look back in time and go, well, they were all banging rocks, but they also moved really big rocks, really hard rocks. And then they made them very laser guided and could control earthquakes because they were bored. It just, we don't relate to what we find correctly at all with any common sense. It's just okay, we just need to table all of this, have these conversations.
I think it equates to fear. I think it's people, especially in academia, when you start questioning them and their paradigm gets questioned, they get fearful. They don't know how to answer things. Like I would ask questions when I was one of those college dudes that went through college to become a teacher, and I was doing my earth and space science classes, and I would be like, how did primitive humans with atlatls and whatnot kill 180 species of megafauna that were running around in North and Central America? I mean, you're talking about, and they always focus on the ill, chill, or kill. They either got sick, it got cold, or humans killed them, or a combination of both. And it's like, so all the ice sheets just disappeared, and, there was an ice dam, the Missoula flood, blah, blah, blah. And it's just glossed over. And it usually ends up being, these poor primitive people, because they happen to find, some knife marks in mastodon bones. Well, they could have scavenged that mastodon. They might have killed one of the few to try to survive, but there was no way they were going to go extinct 180 species of everything that was over about 100 pounds.
Yeah.
Overnight, it just.
Well, I think Jim and I both agree with you, but we don't know much. We're dropouts.
Yeah.
Well,
we just use common sense, our brain, and wisdom. So,
yeah. my problem, and I didn't realize it until years later. I actually saw what my IQ was, and I think it's what disappointed my mother, because it was 148, and there isn't. I've worked for most of my companies I've worked for have been high tech type companies. I can remember I was this was in the early 80s when optical discs, CD-ROM, DVDs were just starting to move forward. And I was working for a company out of Yverdon, Switzerland. And I went back to the company for training on the equipment. And I walked in there, and then within about 30 seconds, I understood the process. I knew what it did. I knew how it did it. And I wasn't sure how I could program it. I could figure that out fairly easy. It was using a program logical controller, PLC, to control the ejection molding machine. But I understood the process. There was a guy with multiple degrees. He was number 3, I think it was, in the hierarchy as far as the engineers there. And he was working on some stuff, and he still couldn't grasp how it went from point A to point B and the process in between. He was still fairly lost. So, or did we make Jarek disgusted and he had to leave?
No, I don't think so.
The great thing about us doing this show, everyone knows, is audio, but we are all actually sitting together and chatting face to face. We're all drinking scotch right now, and Jim's got a cigar. And for all of those not looking, I went to turn on another light, because normally I have a full audio or a visual setup for everyone listening, so that when you guys do see me on shows, there's a lot of artificial light involved. But I have this huge 12-foot window that Jim and Wayne can't see. And right now the sun is going down, and it's beautiful, still sunny afternoon, but I realized my camera is like focusing so fast that someone's going to have a seizure if I didn't go turn on another light. So no one's going to see us, but so Jim just outed me.
Yeah. I told you, I've had a number of premonitions of things are going to happen, and they happened. And it's kind of scary. I've had another one, and it keeps, maybe once or twice a year, I'll have the dream is that I'm in Seattle when the Cascadia subduction zone decides to pop. That's when the Pacific plate and North American plate are going. The Pacific plate's going underneath the North American plate, and this with the North American plate, it's going like this. It releases every 250 years. They've done core samples. They predict. They said almost like clockwork. Every 250 years, they have a major eruption, and it's usually 7 to 9 on the Richter scale.
Wow.
It's 150 years overdue. And a University of Washington geologists or volcanologists who were doing the studying it said when it finally does release, and if it goes the full 800 miles from the top of Vancouver Island down to about Eureka, it will be everything west of I-5 will be gone.
I did that. I won the district science fair doing earthquakes and discussing that very subject. I got a blue ribbon for that. And I have been terrified of going out there since I was 13, because there isn't going to be a California. I mean, I'm looking for beachfront property over the 4th in Vegas. I think that's where the beach is going to end up, or maybe.
I live in Arizona, and it's just beaches right, just right down the road.
You and I are going to be sitting with our feet up on a dock, and it's not going to be in San Fran.
Yeah, no, I have, and I keep having this same thing, and I know I'm going to be there, but I'm okay. And people that are near and dear to me are okay, but the entire West Coast is wiped out. But the one that's freaky, and it's along those same lines. When I was on the Big Island, Hawaii, this was in '96. I was talking to one of the volcanologists there at the the Volcano Research Center there at Kilauea. And he said, have you driven around the crater? And I said, yeah. I said, did you see the sign that says the rift? And there's a sign pointing down, there's a crack in the road. He said, yeah. He said, well, the crack is, there's a big chunk of the island is breaking away from the island. And you can actually measure the change with a Stanley ruler over maybe you go every couple of weeks, you go there and measure. Nice. Another. He said, if it goes in bits and pieces, things will be okay. But if it goes all at once, and that's a very good probability because it did it in Oahu about 120,000 years ago, it's going to dump 60 cubic miles of the Big Island. Is going to drop to the bottom of 17,000 feet of water. It will be a tsunami that will be 1,500 to 3,000 feet high, affecting the entire Pacific Rim. Everything within 150 miles of the ocean will be gone.
Yeah, Lynn and I know you just talked to her the other night. We were sitting at America's Stonehenge in Salem, New Hampshire, did a live show, and we were literally sitting a few feet from a crack. I mean, it's a straight up crack, and there are ferns growing in it. And Dennis is like, yeah, this is the fault line right here. And so, you're sitting there and you're going, Murphy's Law.
Yeah.
Don't want to, I guess we're on a solid piece of bedrock and we were about 8 feet from it. So like in the movies, I hope we can just stand there and we don't fall off and whatever. But yeah, it's so weird. I mean, Minnesota itself is sitting on a plate that it's so funny. I like how they say there's inactive fault lines. All I hear is the egg could crack anywhere. That's all, it could crack anywhere. But here we are floating around on it like la-di-da-di-da-da-da. And then, we have these, one of the theories that I've never looked into, but has been thrown at me as the only way that the Eye of Africa could be at its height and Tiwanaku could be at that height. And then the city off the coast of Cuba off the west side, that's 2,300 feet deep. The only theory that ever gets thrown at me, Jim, is hydrostatic plate shifting. I know it's a rabbit hole, but do you think of anything of that? Yeah. I just don't know.
You look at known sites that we know that we're above water. Even up in the Himalayas, they found seashells.
Right. But do you think any of it could dramatically? Do you think there's enough water in the world that we're actually quite a bit of it is actually leaking down under the plates to the point where it's boiling and steaming to the point where it's shifting whole continental shelves to drop and rise thousands of feet?
I would have to say no, but
the movement of magma will cause that.
Yeah,
right.
But if you think about we here in Michigan, we had 3 miles of ice on top of us, 10 or about 13,000 years ago. And if you rapidly get rid of a huge ice sheet that went all the way down to Kentucky, from the North Pole all the way around the whole top of this planet.
It was SUVs and global warming.
Yeah, no, it was something else. And if you think of because we got the crust of the earth, and underneath the crust, we have the asthenosphere. Nope, we got the asthenosphere, which is part of the upper mantle. And that is like soft and plastic like. Okay. So the crust kind of floats around on this asthenosphere. Now imagine if you have a huge ice sheet that is pushing down,
no longer heavy,
and then no longer heavy. So you take your hand, push it down into a like a cushion, like a memory foam cushion, and then you release that hand. You're going to see that what we call isostatic rebound, because here in Michigan we get earthquakes. They're only on a 2 or a 3, but it's because we're living in the Michigan basin, and that basin is going from this bowl shape, and it's trying to equalize out. Now imagine what happens when you take all of that ice and quickly melt it, maybe in 2 shots with the massive distribution of weight and the 2 meltwater pulses that they have evidence for. And what's going to happen when that weight shift and the ground happens, happens to move. So yeah, I think there's something to that whole isostatic type of weight distribution of water and the ice from the northern ice sheets that melted. And if you talk to Randall Carlson or Graham Hancock, they'll tell you, a comet came by that broke up into many pieces and slammed into the North American ice sheet. And that's what caused the massive climate change, the melt and the, flooding that is permeate. You can see it permeate all the mythologies, 150 myths that talk about the flood.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Jim, anytime you are going to fly to Seattle, we need to know. Every trip.
Right.
We are the first to know. We will share with everyone. In fact, don't go. But if you do,
no, my best and dearest friend in the world lives in Seattle, along with quite a number. I lived there for 18 years. So
you play on the edge. A lot of people, if you don't know, besides being on the Ring of Fire, Seattle ironically has the most degreed human beings in the country per capita. And the city is around 5, not 1, 5 active volcanoes for all of you listening. So think of Pompeii, think of what is allegedly the smartest people on the planet, and they all live around 5 Pompeiis, which makes no sense.
Yeah, well, you have Baker, Rainier, Adams, Mount St. Helens,
Shasta. I think.
I have
Shasta's venting right now.
Yeah,
there's steam venting. I was talking to a guy from the University of Washington who's into volcanoes, and he said the magma chamber of all the Pacific Coast volcanoes, the magma chambers are filling. There's a tremendous amount of activity that they have never seen before.
Jim, your friend is going to fly and visit you at your new beachfront property. You are not going out to Seattle.
Right.
He'll be
in Vegas.
RB will be here in 2 days or 3 days. So
good. Not there. You stay. Yeah. You stay there. He comes there. That's none of this. Do you have any other recurring dreams that are just recurring? And I, for years, had a recurring dream, and I realized I've had this dream before, and then it went to, I have a consistent reoccurring dream. Do you have any others that don't predict anything, but that are just a place or something that's just?
I know I'm going to live to be at least 105.
Yeah, no doubt. But that's interesting. Is it in a dream?
Yeah.
And are you doing something in the dream, or are you just like, oh, I'm at my birthday party?
I don't know how I determine how old I am, other than maybe I'm looking at the calendar. It's past. It's it's 2050 or 2051 that I can see a calendar that has that, and everything around me is different.
Interesting.
So and I have excellent blood pressure. I don't have any blockage at all in my cardiovascular system. So I have everything about me other than I can't see. I had cataracts. I can't hear because I had a brain tumor and they severed my auditory nerve in one ear, and I've been around airplanes too much, so I can't hear much out of the other ear. I got rotten knees, but other than that, I'm a perfect specimen of a 77-year-old guy.
But wow. So when we meet, are you going to look like Captain Pike from Star Trek?
He's all buff.
Yeah. Is there, you're going to be in some sort of high tech, movement machine, and it's like, well,
yeah,
that, or he's going to be on a Little Rascal. We're going to have to meet at TGI Fridays.
Yeah. So
those are all those funny things where you do something, you experience life, and then the repercussions. It's like, well, you're going to have these adventures, and then, well, here's what you're going to suffer: your eyesight, your hearing, and well, we don't know about your knees, but it's not looking good.
Yeah, I burned a couple 90-foot telephone poles when I was in the Air Force. I was up taking an antenna down, and I'm coming down on hooks, and I'm at the 85-foot level. I take my belt off. I unhook one leg, 1 foot, and I stick it into what I thought was wood, but I didn't realize I'd hit a metal plate.
Oh,
I took the other one out, and I'm free falling 85 feet, and I'm holding myself away from the telephone pole, and it was slow motion. And I'm thinking to myself, if I don't cut back in, I'm going to be wearing my knees in my ears. So I brought my legs up, and I cut back in about 5 feet from the ground.
Yeah.
I took one step and I was off. I took my climbers off and I went to stand up and I fell down. I had bruised the inside of my calves and the bottom of my feet so much, but I didn't get hurt. But it was all in slow motion. It was all in slow motion.
I rock climb, but with ropes. But definitely, the longest fall I've had was 25 feet, and it's quite a thing to fall. Like actually fall off of a tall wall or 60 feet or 80 feet. It's a thing. But I don't know if you can chalk that up to luck or just like extreme 007 skill.
It wasn't my time.
Clearly not.
I don't believe in not consequences.
Coincidence.
Coincidences. Yeah. And, people and events happen to you because you're supposed to. You meet people coming into your life and go out of your life because that was part of the master plan.
It's so funny. Well, Lynn was talking about you. A few people were mentioning nothing in my vernacular, nothing in my mindset said, well, sounded really interesting, but I had no idea I'd be sitting here with you with Wayne. This is like, it's so bizarre to think I spend almost 2 weeks filming all the various ruins in Connecticut and over and Salem and America's Stonehenge over the last week and a half. And I was in Texas looking at the Galt archaeological site. And over the last 2 months, I've been out of town. But it's so funny how you just kind of came into the universe for me. And then here we are doing a show together and meeting. And now we're going to meet in August. It's I don't believe it's accidental either.
Yeah, and I just happened to text you this morning being like, Jared, I'm going to have Jim Goodall on. Michelle's not going to be here. Can you help out? You want to come on? He's like, sure. And here both of you work with Lynn, and who's the one person I haven't been able to talk to yet on my podcast? Lynn, because she ran off and got married.
Yeah.
So
well, no one's perfect.
Yeah. Well,
it's a shout out, Lynn. Maybe she'll hear
much
that.
Much love.
Yeah. No, I thoroughly enjoy my 2-hour segment with her, and it's only scheduled for an hour, but we've never made it an hour. It usually goes an hour, 2 hours, 10 minutes, 2 hours, 20 minutes. And we finally say, hey, I got to go because my dog, I have a rescued German Shepherd. Her name is Scarlet. and she is she can tell time, and she knows at 5:30 if I'm on that stupid computer, she'll come in and she'll start pestering me, and if I ignore her, she'll start barking because it's time to come into the living room with the rest of her pack. So my wife, my dog, and I are in the same room because she's the most incredible creature. I've had German Shepherds before, but she was a feral street dog for the first 14 months of her life.
Wow.
And they picked her up, and she is the sweetest. She doesn't respond to a name. She doesn't know how to play catch. She doesn't know how to fetch. But she has us well trained. I had a white German Shepherd.
Okay. But they're so smart and they're very chatty. Is yours chatty?
A little bit. I had two purebred German Shepherd when I lived in Whidbey Island, north of Seattle. And I had to put deadbolts on the French doors going out to the deck, not because I was concerned about burglars, but Charlie Brown was my 130-pound male. He knew how to open every door in the house.
Cool.
So I put in deadbolts, and when I close it, I'd go over there, and he'd come right up, look at me, and I would cover so he couldn't see what I'm doing, and I would deadbolt the door. We couldn't understand. We would come home we had an invisible fence around the property. We'd come home from at night. My little female bear was a barker. Charlie Brown didn't bark. He did. When he did, you knew it. And we'd put them in the garage. I'd bring their beds in there. There was water and food. And we'd go because this is before I put the deadbolts on all the doors. Because they would always be outside. We came home one night, and both dogs are at the edge of the driveway. I said, I could have sworn I closed the back door to the garage. So opened up the garage, I hit the garage door thing, and opened up, and the back door is wide open. So I go in there to grab it and close it, and it was slimy and it had teeth marks on it. It was
gosh.
He knew that he bit it and turned it and pushed, he would open it up.
Okay. And Whidbey, isn't that off of Everett?
Yeah, directly off of Everett. Yeah, you take the Mukilteo ferry to Clinton, which is where the ferry terminal is there on Whidbey Island.
So I was on one of the private islands off of Everett. I had a very good friend. Which one?
Hat Island.
Yeah. So like everybody has these old vehicles out there. They all own land. They all got their boats and their slips. And
yeah,
my daughter learned to drive on that island.
Oh, darn. Okay. I love the Pacific Northwest. It's beautiful, but it's turned into an open toilet.
There you go, everyone. Places you're not going to go because it'll be underwater soon.
Yep.
Or not.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Well, this is a perfect example, Jared, of synchronicities, man, because, here, he's got family and from Minnesota. You're in Minnesota. I mean, you both work with Lynn, but you didn't meet before. It's just,
yeah. I've been to Everett. I've been to Everett. He lived there.
Yeah.
I've been on the very islands he's talking about. And then there is a lot of overlap in the Twin Cities. And then as far as research goes, I think there's probably a lot of stuff that overlaps. One of the things I theorized is that all over the world, there is this ancient engineered soil called terra preta. We don't know how to replicate it. It's in places that were always supposed to be nomadic. It has piezoelectric properties. It filters heavy metals, but there's enough oddity with it that collective human consciousness and memory system, part of me believes and thinks that the reason Minnesota is one of the most inventive and creative places. And I've checked this. That friend of mine who moved to Seattle is a very brilliant therapist. But I've said, look, everybody feels like they had a special childhood, but was there something that we were like hyper aware of growing up? Was the 80s really about us? I mean, was there something exceptional about like what we're aware of? And she's like, yeah, there is. And I can't help but think that around the world, anywhere that people are living on a more mass concentration of the external and physical remnants of a very ancient past, I think somehow we have a slightly better connection to these collective consciousnesses, genetic memories. I think we're just better at reconnecting at some of it. And I think it's soil related. I think it's genetic related.
Well, it could be frequency too. I mean,
right. Yes. Yep.
And I think Tesla said it back 100 years ago that there's a certain frequency. Was it 433 megahertz or something? It's in that realm, and they have, for whatever reason, the Bureau of Standards throughout the world decided that we weren't going to use that. We were going to hide that frequency, and it's gone to something else. And he said people who are still in tuned with that frequency are the people that do incredible things, like Elon Musk. I mean, yep. I love his comment. He said, "I didn't go to Harvard, but a lot of people work for me, dude."
Yeah. And he's ruthless. It's wonderful because he's not trying to be intentionally mean about it, but he's very matter of fact. It's over and over. It's not like one time. It's like, look, were you smart enough to maybe try college? Great. But were you also smarter and did you quit? And, what's driving you to, well, look, I'm there. Wayne's shaking his head.
I'm shaking my head because I had to stay in to get my degree to be a teacher. However, before I became a teacher, you don't know this, Jared, but after I got out of the military and I was in a band and I toured for about 8 years with a band. And one of the places we played was the Mirage Prince's Club over there in Minnesota, and got to meet Prince. And this was all before he had passed away and everything. But
that would have been weird if it was after.
Well, yeah.
I ran into him at Perimeter there on First Avenue.
All right.
And also
he was a short guy.
Slam. Oh, he was like 5'3" or something.
Yeah,
like that.
He was very short.
Yeah, he was a really tiny guy.
Yeah.
But for during that time, for about 20 years or so, I worked in IT. I was one of the first kids on my block to get a Commodore 64 and learn basic programming. And
we talked about this. Yes.
Cassette player. But that's, I was doing IT, and I was a manager of, the Borders Walden Book days.
Yep.
My technicians, so I had a team of 12 technicians, and we were responsible for 900 Walden stores around the world. And those were the people we supported, making sure their computers all worked and everything. So we all are coming from the same bizarre place to end up here. I'm just sitting back trying to put all this through my brain, and it's just driving me crazy.
I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the fact that I think it was February of 19, not that many years ago, my friend Michael Schratt said he was going to be at a MUFON function in Phoenix. So I decided at the very last minute, to go up to Phoenix and meet with Michael. But I also knew that George Knapp was going to be there and Jeremy Corbell. But I went there primarily to see Michael. And when I got there, Richard Dolan was the speaker. So there was nobody in the vendor area. And I go in there, sit down. I asked, guy was sitting right as I came in on the left-hand side. I said, he had an extra, very soft, cushiony chair. I said, can I use your chair? He said, sure. He said, my name's Doc Skinner. And I said, well, I'm Jim Goodall. And he just stopped. He says, Jim Goodall? I said, yeah. I said, I didn't see your name on the program. I said, why would my name be on the program? He said, you're very, very well known in this area of interest. And I said, I'll be darned. I didn't know that. So, and I didn't. So I went up. I actually went at the first Disclosure Con. I was in 2019 up in Show Low, Pine Top area of the Rim Country in northern Arizona. And this, my involvement in this community didn't start until February, March of 19. So I didn't go to my first MUFON function, and the only one they had in 2020 was in late February, early March in San Francisco with Lauren Felton. They put something together, and that was the first time I ever gave a talk.
Wow. I figured you spoke before that.
No. I just, when I didn't write. When I retired in 2013, I wrote books. I get one a year to get them out. My Blackbird book was 50 years in the making, but it is the ultimate Blackbird book. Even the guys at the Skunk Works say that. But no, I had always had an interest in it, but I had no direct involvement until late winter 2019, and this is where we're at today.
Crazy. The big famous Tic Tac video that everyone's chatting about. It's funny. I'm with Dennis Stone at America's Stonehenge, and we're looking at I was there for the equinox just last week, right?
Okay.
And we're looking around, and he's like, "Do you see that? Across the valley, the America's Stonehenge is 110 acres, but the main site where all the equinox and solstice points, we're looking at one." And he goes, "Do you see that radio tower that's across the valley about 20 miles? That's where the colonel lives that saw the Tic Tac. He lives right here." And I'm like, "What?" He lives right across from America's Stonehenge. I think it's the alignment that's in line with actual Stonehenge, but he lives dead across the valley. It's crazy how small or the interconnected or a couple degrees from everybody and everything it can be. This experience speaking, though, are you having a good time with it?
Oh, I love it.
Now that you're at it?
Yeah. I mean, I have 50 years of memory. I'm blessed with an extremely good memory. Music to me is a time machine. I can hear a song and it can take me back to the moment I heard it, and I can see everything in color. I can tell you where I was at, who I was with, what I was wearing when I was 5 years old, when I first heard.
Even the smells and stuff will come back.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I wonder that could be a synesthesia thing for you too, but also I think it's because you're Sicilian. You said Sicilian, right?
Yep.
Yeah, you guys can't forget debts and other things. You are a human Rolodex of, I will ask for a favor someday.
Use guys.
Yep.
Yeah. So
you're genetically disposed to remembering everything.
We've been in for 2.5 hours.
Yes, we have. And I was just going to jump in and say we should probably wrap this up. So it's been an awesome conversation. But Jim, before you go, I got to ask you just 2 quick questions. Number 1, what kind of appearances do you have coming up in the future? Any new book releases or anything that you want to tell the audience about?
I'm working at my 29th book is at my publisher right now, which is Osprey. It is Rickover's Dream, the Nuclear Navy. And I cover at least 1 page per submarine. A lot of pages, a lot of subs I have either 2, 4, or 6 pages. And I cover all 227 nuclear-powered submarines built or designed or under construction for the United States Navy. And it's basically an encyclopedia and a memory book. And that's at Osprey right now. My 28th book, which is not out yet because I need to get access to an Ohio-class SSGN Arsenal boat. I've covered from the reactor bulkhead forward, internally and externally, the Ohio boat, the C4 version, and then the D5 upgrade. And I've been on 20 nuclear-powered submarines at one time or another. I've been to 400 feet deep in a ballistic missile submarine. I have requested, but because of COVID, everything got screwed up. I had requested from the Navy the next Virginia class that leaves Bremerton, Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. I want to be on it when it's heading back to Pearl Harbor. It's 8 days. They'll go to test depth, which is on the Virginia class, I believe is about 1,200 feet. They'll do emergency blows, and they do all their testing and everything else. When they leave Puget Sound, they go through all the things in deep water just off the coast. So if they have problems, they can always come back and get them fixed. But it's as soon as I get access to an SSGN, either at Kings Bay in Georgia or at there in Hood Canal at Bangor, then my 28th book will be submitted. I love machines, and friends of mine said, you're an airplane nut. So what the hell are you doing with submarines? I said, they're stealth, They're black and they're deadly. It meets all the qualifications to have me interested in them. And the fact that
and they're spooky.
99% of the world has only seen the top 5 feet and the sail off a submarine. They do their business, they're underwater. You don't know where they're at. I have a 3-volume set. Volume 1 and 2 are already done. I did the Los Angeles class, the 688 and the 688I, and Know Your Adversary. So I cover the Chinese, the Russian, the North Korean, and the Iranian subs. And then volume 2 was on the Virginia Seawolf class. It took me 7.5 years to get on the USS Connecticut because they only have 3 Seawolf boats, and you can't get on the Jimmy Carter because that's the spook boat. And I photographed everything. And people who are in the Navy, who have in the submarine service, have been on the Connecticut or the Seawolf, said, how in the hell did you get a camera on that boat? I said, well, it took me 7.5 years, but I got on. And I photographed everything. I mean, forward of the reactor bulkhead. You know, you could look into the passageway back to the maneuvering room. But if I were to stick my head in past the threshold, I could be arrested and charged with espionage.
Wow.
Oh, but it's and the guys are great. The guys are great, and it's just you have an 18,000 ton, 560 foot long machine that they've limited down to 20 submarine launched ballistic missiles. It used to be 24. The D5 has the capability of carrying 14 W78. They're about 1 kilo, I think they're 80 kilotons. But the D5 carries the W88, and that is 450 kilotons. And usually each missile carries at least 3, typically 4, and they're limited by SALT, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. That is the baddest machine on the planet. When they go out on patrol, there's only 3 people in the world have any idea where they're at: the captain, the XO, and the navigator. They have 150,000 square miles of Northern Pacific Ocean, and they're as quiet as anything out there. And they only do 4 knots. They go down to 700 feet, and they go in a zigzag pattern. And multiple times a day, there are places on the ocean that have like transponders that they go over and hover over them, and they update their inertial navigation system. And every time you update your INS, your error rate gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So by day 1, when you go out, maybe you can hit your target within maybe 100 feet or 150 feet. By the end of your patrol, you can hit it within about 3 or 4 feet. They've adjusted and improved the resolution of where you're at as it pertains to the gyros on the missiles and on the sub.
You're also doing a weekly show with Lynn Hurley over there at Rebellious Ufology. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah. And it's my fun Monday. Everybody said, Monday is not terrible. Yeah. Mondays from 5 to 7 Pacific Coast time.
Okay.
And
that's like about 8 o'clock Eastern time.
Yeah. And we usually go at minimum hour and a half. We've never gone an hour and a half. We've gone at least 2 hours plus.
Yeah, kind of like this one.
yeah. I mean, when I got on, I wasn't sure what we were going to talk about. We talked about everything under the sun.
Yeah.
And I'm just, I'm absolutely delighted that I've linked up with Jared. And
yeah, me too.
Last question, and this can include ex-wives, but do you have any ties to Michigan?
We left Michigan out, Jim.
No, I don't. Other than I have some friends that live there.
Okay.
And Bob Lazar used to live up near Traverse City.
Yeah.
And I was supposed to visit him the end of April. And after I gave my talk at Beale Air Force Base, I was going to go spend a couple of days with him. And my car does not drive. There was chance of snow in some of the passes. And my rear tires are 13 inches of wide tread. and it's squirrely enough when it's damp out, let alone being on snow and ice. So I had to cancel.
Jim, well, thanks a lot for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I hope everybody enjoys the conversation. And Jared, it's always great talking to you and having you come on and help out and be actually my wingman on this one. So it's been a guy's night out. So
this was fun. I enjoyed every bit of it.
Well, it sounds like you had a heck of a night, Wayne.
Oh, that was awesome. I mean, 3 guys sitting around talking about fast planes, spooky planes, fast cars, UFOs,
heavy books,
very heavy books.
What, the 6-pound book?
Yeah, I'm still waiting for my loan to get approved so I can get one shipped here.
I was going to say the book weighs more than I did at birth.
Well, it is Jim's baby, so, you know.
Hey.
See what I did there?
You did.
Wow. But yeah, the Skunk Works, 75 years of Skunk Works, Lockheed Martin, man, those guys have been accused of using alien technology to make these aircraft. And, you know, think about what Jim was saying when he was friends with the former president and the new president. Well, Ben Rich, and then he passed away. And now there's the new president of Skunk Works. You know, and Ben Rich was saying, you know, we've got things in the desert that's 50 years ahead of what you can think of. You know, what the heck? That was like 30 some years ago he was saying that.
Well, I know that I look forward to getting Jim back on the show so I have a chance to talk to him as well. So he definitely, he's a character.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So he is a character.
Yeah, and everybody, don't forget, you can also see Jim every Monday on the Rebellious Ufology YouTube channel, hosted by Lynn. Used to be Wallington, but now it is Hurley, so Lynn Hurley's channel. Man, this was a long one, Michelle. I think we should probably wrap it up at this point.
Yeah,
what do you think?
I'll go ahead and wrap it up for the night, and until next time.
All right, everybody. Have a good night. We're going to get out of here. And remember, keep your eyes to the sky.
You have been listening to the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast. You can reach us at mi.ufo.podcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter at mi_UFO and join our Facebook group by searching for Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters. So until next time.